My name is Duncan. I'm a member of United States Servicemen's Fund and SOS, the group that supports anti-war GI coffee houses across the country. My connection with the trial, well, directly today, was as a witness, based on having been on some of the initial planning sessions for the convention demonstrations. First of all, to establish my background and my credentials, they asked for my military background, which was objected to by the court. Said that what I had been in the military or what I had done in the military was irrelevant. We went on with the testimony. We tried to talk about the war crime tribunals, and we were judged that war crimes are irrelevant, that genocide is irrelevant. Tried to give some of the background, work with anti-war GIs and how they feel about repression in general, and the Conspiracy 7 and Bobby Seale in particular. That was considered irrelevant. I was able to establish the fact that it was a war crimes tribunal and that there was such a thing as war crimes there. We got that in some other strange context. And the fact that we had talked about bringing a tribunal to Chicago relating to war crimes committed by the United States in Vietnam. That much of it was established. The particular atrocities, war crimes, and so on that we wanted, at least the jury, maybe perhaps for the first time in their life to ever hear about, we were never allowed to testify to that.
What line did the government take in cross-examination?
The main line was trying to establish where we had planned to hold this demonstration, if at all. And I told them it had not been established, that I did go with Rennie down into the amphitheater area and trying to make some contingency plans. So the major thing we accomplished at the trial, and with my testimony, that was that GIs are irrelevant, their feelings are irrelevant, genocide is irrelevant, and the war in Vietnam is irrelevant. And the conspiracy trial, if nothing else, has really shown that justice has dispensed, at least in Chicago or in federal courts, is just a big shuck from the word go.
That's what I hope would happen, is they'd get convicted here, because in the legal process it'd be important for them to get, to get the law overturned would be important for a conviction to result in them overturning the law. But I think more and more, that's why I say it's difficult for the movement to have an anti-conspiracy weapon. You cannot really mount a legal weapon against it if you're faced with a judge like Judge Hoffman and a prosecutor like, I guess, the man has turned out to be, someone who, acting together, prosecutor and judge, just will not allow the facts to come out, just will not allow the thing to be debated the way it supposedly is to be debated in a court of law. And then given the composition of the other courts that you're going to run into on the way up or below those, for that matter, you can't be really optimistic about any justice resulting from the thing eventually. That's why I think the anti-conspiracy weapon may have to be a massive conspiracy and a real conspiracy, of a conscious and open conspiracy of thousands and thousands of people.
When I took the stand, I thought that it was really a time when a defendant ought to attempt, at least, to speak to the other America that sort of sits in that jury box, that at least with a jury has gone through an incredible 5-month political experience of their own. But to try to take our politics, our culture, our radicalism, and to present it in a way that was comprehensible to those 14 people that have lived through this experience with us.
I've been torn enough too, and I think I lost my temper at least a couple times. But it was like going to the dentist and having a root canal every morning is what it was like.
I think also by putting on a defense, we were able to help build political support for the case. Only by bringing in defense witnesses well-known ones as well as lesser-known ones, do you start to get people involved in the trial who then can go out and be speakers, return to their hometowns, return to their political circles, and talk about what they saw and experienced on the witness stand.
But to the image of the court, you see, to the image of the court's dignity and decorum, as the judge refers to it, were tremendously disruptive. I mean, all of us have some concept of the media. You know, I know that I do a somersault, I do a handstand downstairs on the sidewalk, in front of the court building on the day it opens, you see, that by the time that hits the East Coast or the West Coast, that was done in the middle of the courtroom in front of the judge, you see. And then the judge reads out in the paper the next day and says, I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus. But you see, nothing's happening in the room. But mythically, everything is going on in the room. I think people around the country have a view of this trial as one of total chaos, defendants fighting with marshals on the floor, people coming in naked, the judge jerking off in his chair, witnesses standing up and screaming bloody murder, people running around with guns and bombs, and that's the image that we've created of the trial without actually having done any of those things.
Henry, I don't think the problem was Judge Hoffman at all. I think that to isolate Chicago into an obdurate judge, a bitter judge, a bad judge, would be to almost obfuscate all of the issues involved there. This was not the judge, this was the government of the United States. The lead in Chicago was taken by the prosecution, and the judge was a willing and complacent tool in all of this, because he had, I guess, a lot of the vision of an old man who was determined that his world wouldn't shatter before his eyes, and it was also determined to regulate and control these wicked, evil persons whom he had prejudged because of many factors. But it was the government, it was the prosecution, which set the stage and produced the results.
And then I tried to sing my song, The Fixin' to Die Rag, or as it's sometimes known, the Vietnam Rag. And I was stopped by the Sergeant of Arms, I guess, who came over, and I had closed my eyes and I was just singing rather loudly, and the judge began yelling at me to stop, and the Sergeant of Arms came over and tried to close my mouth by putting his hand under my chin. And so then I stopped, and then Mr. Kunstler got permission from the judge for me to say the lyrics of the song, and so then I recited the lyrics of the song, The Fixin' to Die Rag.
Are there any comments that you might add concerning this whole Democratic Convention incident that you would have liked to have testified to but were unable to do so?
I would have liked to testify in an altogether different manner, which is, I think, after all, you're having 8 men, 7 in this courtroom, being tried for on very serious charges. If they're found guilty, they can get 5 or 10 years. And what's involved is what were the subtle motivations of their brain. And I was forced in testimony, as I imagine all the other witnesses have been, to answer ridiculously low-level yes and no questions. For example, at one point, when the question was whether Mr. Rubin had said that we will intimidate the establishment. And I was trying to recollect, not whether he literally used that word. In other words, I was summarizing a conversation with him when I said, if I did say, that he had said that it was intimidating the establishment. What I'm getting at is that we talked for hours. The judge then insists that it all be boiled down, or the prosecuting attorney insists be boiled down to a few words and phrases. It doesn't work like that. The human process that's involved is altogether different. People, I mean, if they're talking about conspiracy, the question is what the intent is, what the natural desire is of the people who are planning a move. Are they together or are they apart? Are they conspiring or are they not conspiring? The gist of my testimony was that it was a curious conspiracy when these people weren't even in contact with one another. In other words, the part I found most frustrating in testifying was I couldn't testify to the main point I had to give today. And my objection to the procedure in the court is simply that if you are trying people for conspiracy, my God, that's a serious charge. It's a particularly dubious matter. I mean, the very law on this matter of conspiracy is terribly difficult and tenuous. And the least that one's entitled to is to go in for a great deal of exploration on what the nature of political philosophy is and what the relation of political philosophy to action is, rather than to get in a whole series of yes and no questions and did he literally say this word or didn't he? You know, it's not an accident case.
You guilty?
Yes.
What?
What happened bad thoughts? Because the law says that you're guilty if you have bad thoughts. We're accused of conspiracy to have intent. We're not accused of any actions. And I confess that I am guilty of wanting to see the government overthrown. You know, the judge today said that the crucial factors are attitude. And our attitude has made us guilty. And it's like, remember when the judge looked out and said, look at the expression on the defendant Hoffman's face? It's the expression on our faces. That's what makes us guilty. Because we look at the judge with total and complete contempt for everything he stands for everything that he believes in, and that makes us guilty.
That they simply could not do in the courtroom in the last 4.5 months what they did and attempted to do in 1 week during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
Dave, what do you think the government was hoping to accomplish by bringing charges of conspiracy to incite riot during the Democratic Convention against you and the 7 other defendants?
Well, despite the constant disclaimers of the judge, it's clear that the trial is a political trial. And I don't know if the government has a fully worked out conclusion that it hopes to arrive at. At the very least, it's a holding action on the government's part to try to intimidate and discourage the growing insurgencies in the country. A good case can be made for the fact that it's very much more carefully thought out than that on the government's part, and that it is part of a new conception of society which the present administration has come up with in terms of the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s. That is one in which the facade of democracy will have to be somewhat scrapped, and in which the government will much more clearly proceed in the courts and outside the courts against people who are trying to assert human dignity, trying to struggle for justice either for themselves or for other members of the society. At the beginning, I think that some people thought that this had something to do with Daley's revenge, that Daley had been humiliated throughout the country, in the world for that matter, and he'd also suffered a severe political blow in Chicago, and that he had to recoup these losses by showing that the police riot, the widespread violence in Chicago at the time of the convention, was caused by a hard core of agitators who came in with this in mind. And I wouldn't rule this out as one of the elements in the government's persecution. However, I think that the objectives probably go far beyond that. General Mitchell, for example, overruled most of the lawyers in his own Department of Justice when he decided to go ahead with the indictment, which means that this was, even though persecution and political repression are not new in our society, but I think that this indicates that the top leaders in the Nixon administration, the opinion makers, the decision makers, so to speak, had decided that this was a new period and they had to go beyond the previously established norms of political repression and prosecution. Now, the simplest way to put it is that the society is breaking down. In a lot of areas of society, we're now seeing a repeat at a higher level of what happened
at the time of the Montgomery bus boycott, when Rosa Parks simply could not walk to the back of the bus anymore and be humiliated that way when she was tired at the end of the day's work. And that women, blacks, students, people who like to grow their hair long, people who like to smoke marijuana, people who are appalled at the atrocities in Vietnam, people who are disgusted with the hypocrisy and the dishonesty of the administration, that all over, and usually unexpectedly and without a great deal of prior organization, people are acting as Rosa Parks did. I think that the government feels that it's necessary to do something about this and to show that in our society, or I really should say in their society, that in their society there are limits to what people can do and get away with it. The people have to get back into the role of good Germans, so to speak, taking the analogy from the Nazi period in Germany. As I see it, what they've done is rather carefully chosen a cross-section of the various trends within the movement, omitting only women's liberation. Taking symbol of the youth culture revolt with Abbie, Hoffman, and Jerry Rubin, taken symbols of as they would probably see it, more hardline, more political youth revolt of SDS of the past few years with Tom Hayden and Rennie Davis. It's reached into the university academic community, the young academics, the ones who are now, in many cases, working through the new universities committees, but the older graduate students, the younger professors and research assistants with Lee Weiner and John Freund has taken the I don't want to condemn myself to this category, but the more traditional anti-war movement and the mass mobilizations, the organized coalition protests with myself. And then it seems to me it just dragged in the Black Panthers by the hair, so to speak, partly because of the ardor of their desire to crush the Black Panthers, and this provided them with one other opportunity. It's taken these people and it's put them to what is intended to be the humiliation of public charges and public trial and the intended outcome of 10 years in jail. And so it's trying to say to the people in all these and other categories that watch your step. It's all right to dissent. It's all right to vote negatively or to say to speak against what's going on, but don't take it so seriously enough as to want to change society. That's a sense of this, perhaps a secondary aspect. It's part of the procedure of trying to channel the people's revolt back into conventional procedures which the government can handle, or which really not so much the government as the forces behind the government, the military-industrial complex, to use the cliche, the military-industrial complex can handle.
Do you see this, then, as an overall change in the government's policy towards dissent, from an era of co-option to repression?
It will always be a combination of those two factors, the carrot and the stick, the co-optation and the intimidation. But I think that first of all, it's not just the Nixon administration, although the Nixon administration has escalated, to use the current word. But actually, at the convention itself, there was a decision to deal harshly with dissenters and to, or protesters, and to co-opt them less and club them more. Otherwise, Daley could very conveniently, and behind Daley, of course, was the decision-making apparatus of the Democratic Party and the people who were going to finance the campaign and control many of the decisions. Otherwise, they could have decided to let us march to the amphitheater, to put on a great rally, speeches and all the rest, and they could have said, see how
democratic we are, see how liberal we are. This couldn't have happened in Moscow or Peking or Havana, but it happened here. But there was a decision, I think, to not to do that. I don't think this came abstractly. I think it came out of the fact that dissent and protest was becoming much too widespread. And it was a decision that we simply can no longer tolerate dissent. There was not a clear and present danger in Justice Holmes' sense that the people were about to take over physically or to start a riot or to kill a lot of people or whatever it would be. But there was a clear and present danger which they were sensitive to, and that the movement was growing by leaps and bounds, that there was a real inheritance crisis in the established order because the parents could no longer count even on their own children to carry out business as usual, government as usual, American foreign policy as usual, American racial oppression as usual.
Dave, what did the defense try to accomplish in the courtroom beyond winning acquittal, and how is this different from other political trials such as the Spock trial?
Well, I don't want to sound heroic, but I'd have to say that the getting acquittal is only a small part of what we have in mind with the defense. In fact, people who have urged caution on us in the courtroom and in the countryside in our speeches and so forth, and in relation to our decision about whether to take part in other actions and to organize and this kind of thing, people who have urged caution upon us have offered a rather seductive argument that in a political trial the thing that matters most is acquittal, and that if you get a not guilty verdict, then somehow the principles that you stand for have been affirmed. I accept this only up to a certain point, because I think that any human being in any political movement can only function insofar as it functions daily, that it actually carries out and lives up to its principles. Principles is a somewhat abstract, really, phrase or word for it, because what it really amounts to, that it's important that the dynamics of the things that you stand for be expressed and experimented with in daily life, that they grow and change and develop by being active. I mean, this starts at the most elementary level of a human muscle or organ, which atrophies if it's not used. And the same thing applies, I think, with Double's incidents in political and moral and psychological matters. So for us to conduct ourselves during that period with the sole aim of winning acquittal, I think would corrupt us, would be disillusioning or de-energizing, perhaps a better word for it, de-energizing not only for ourselves but the people that we associate. So what we're trying to do is to keep one eye on the jury, yes, to try to actually win them over to a more revolutionary consciousness, to some sensitivity to what's going on, not present ourselves as just, quote, innocent people. We think we're innocent in terms of the law, in terms of the aims of the government, but we want to present ourselves as revolutionists, as people who believe that the forms of society must be changed. That, of course, is a long gamble. To present to the jury a cross-section of the movement, not only in our own selves, but in the people who come and testify for it. So we not only say, well, in Michigan and Belleville at 6 o'clock on August 28th, which is the night that the day that Humphrey was nominated, we're trying not only to say that the police charged a peaceful crowd, but we're also trying to talk in terms of why the crowd was there, what it was trying to accomplish, some of the obligations that we felt in being part of it. Now, over and above the jury, of course, we're trying to do the same thing that the government is. That is, we're trying to talk to the movement and beyond the movement to the people of the country. The difference with the Spark trial that comes to mind immediately is that they really conducted individual defenses, and that we're conducting a group defense. I think this has strengthened us immeasurably, and it would have been easy, but I think tragic for us to conduct individual defenses, because we're really not on trial as individuals. We're on trial as representatives, as a cross-section of the movement. And so we try to plan collectively both our responses to particular court abuses and injustices, and also the nature of our defense, the type of witnesses we put on, the order, the type of thing that we ask them to cover. Secondly, perhaps we have been a little less concerned with showing our technical innocence. Now, naturally, we are trying to get an acquittal, and we're trying to, or if we don't get an acquittal, we're trying to win the case on appeal. But our main preoccupation is with mirroring, reflecting, expressing what our very deep political convictions are.
Well, in line with this, what are the problems you have encountered in using the courtroom as a forum to bring out the political nature of the trial?
The initial problem is presented by the obsolete ritual of the court itself, which has a whole series of rules and regulations as to what one's allowed to say and what one is not allowed to say. The questions when the jury is selected relate to such things as, do they have an opinion on the case? And it seems clear to me that anybody who lived in Chicago in the year 1968 and didn't have an opinion on what happened at the Democratic trial must be disqualified from ruling on social issues. If he says he doesn't have an opinion, either he's a liar or a nincompoop. Now, of course, in real life, people adapt themselves to the repressive or the anti-life forms of society, and so undoubtedly a number of good people have adapted themselves to that form, have been able to jump through the hoop, so to speak, and to say, well, they have no opinion and they're unprejudiced, and are serving on the jury. Well, that same kind of thing extends to the rules of evidence. For example, we have, although we're really charged with intent, crossing state lines with intent to create a riot, 90% of the things which would show what our intent is, what our motivation is, what our mental and political background is, are ruled out. And although the judge is obviously very biased and in open court, it's wrong to blame it all on him and not to realize that many of his repressive decisions actually have precedence in the judicial processes of this society. Now, as I've been sitting there observing this and discovering that nobody is really interested in finding out what the truth is, but only in going through some kind of an elaborate ritual, which is like the antiquated rules of the game as to how cases are tried, I've made the comparison in my own mind. It's probably an obvious one that other people have thought of before, but I must say that it didn't really come clear to me until I went through a couple months of this thing, that the American system of jurisprudence, which relies on what they call the adversary proceeding, is really a perfect reflection of capitalism. Under capitalism, the idea is that everybody goes out and pursues his own selfish interests, tries to get ahead of his fellows, and that somehow, well, at least as envisioned by Adam Smith, the invisible hand of God will turn this into the good society in which everybody ultimately will benefit. And in the same way in the courtroom, by the nature of the adversary proceedings and the rules of evidence which have grown up around the adversary proceeding, the prosecutor makes no attempt to bring out the truth. The defense is not really allowed to bring out the truth. All kinds of things which any sane person would know are part of the truth are simply ruled out.
Dave, how did the removal of Bobby Seale affect the trial?
That for all of us, it's changed the nature of the case a great deal because we miss Bobby Seale so much. Bobby Steele was really, I don't know how to put it, except to say he was really a constant source of inspiration to all of us. He was in jail. He was got up at 4 o'clock in the morning. He spent most of the time from 4 to 10 standing in various bullpens or way stations between the Cook County Jail and the courtroom. Yet he came in always with a fresh and creative approach. And although there was a good deal of harassment concerning our rights to meet with Bobby and to make common plans and discuss what was happening and what should happen and so forth, we did manage to meet with him on an average of an hour a day. And I must say that that has changed the nature of the case for us, the live contact with him. Now, when you add to that the brutal murder of Fred Hampton, who, next to Bobby, we perhaps had the most intimate and regular daily contact with, why, there's just a tremendous sense of loss on all of our parts. But I was going to say a very important dimension is missing, and I guess that's okay to say, but it's more than that. It's more than black-white, but it's just the whole nature of out of their experience and out of the realities of their struggle, what they had to bring into our daily experience inside the courtroom and outside it. Now, in the court itself, Bobby's predicament, being denied Charlie Gary and trying to defend himself and things that resulted from that, partly his creativity, partly the introduction into the courtroom of the whole tension between the black community and the white community, between the black defendant and the white judge. This added an element of tension and heightened drama, which is now missing. The judge now is still so completely ununderstanding of youth, of anti-war, of people who might consider that although they're defendants, they are human beings fighting a positive political struggle. His misunderstanding or lack of understanding in these areas is still colossal. But most of the scenes don't quite match the type of scene where the judge is saying to Bobby Steele, who's bound and gagged and manacled and chained at the time, saying, why, I have known literally hundreds of Negroes, or I guess you call them black people now, but I have known literally hundreds of Negroes, and you may not realize it, but I am one of the best friends your race ever had. Well, the irony of that type of thing is missing.
Well, Dave, you have already served a lengthy jail sentence for refusing to register for the draft during World War II. In light of this experience, what are your feelings now about the prospect of jail?
Well, I guess, like a lot of things in life, despite the fact that I did spend 3 years in jail at that time, besides the shorter sentences later, I guess it's still somewhat unreal to me. I tend to live like everybody does from day to day and from the moment's intense experiences to the next moment's intense experiences. And as I suppose all the defendants, I feel that the importance of what we're trying to do in court, even though, as I hope I've indicated, we may not have handled it as well as maybe in the next political trials people will handle it. The importance of that and of trying to react honestly and sensibly and with some kind of political perspective to the whole thing, to the whole proceeding, that is so important and so urgent and so overrules any other considerations that I guess we kind of live with that and are not too concerned. We figure that when jail comes, then we'll handle that, try to handle that in our own way also. Naturally, I don't want to go to jail, and I will consider it an injustice and an example of political repression. But if I go to jail for 10 years on this charge, I know from previous experience I'll immediately be in a society, an artificial prison society, where practically everybody there, the black people, the Puerto Rican people, the poor white working class people, where 95% of the inmates and the prisoners do come from the lower classes of society, lower in quotes, that is what society is made lower economically and so forth, the underprivileged classes. I will know that they are in there less justly than I am.
Are you guilty?
Yes.
Of what?
Of having bad thoughts, because the law says that you're guilty if you have bad thoughts. We're accused of conspiracy to have intent. We're not accused of any actions. And I confess that I am guilty of wanting to see the government overthrown. You know, the judge today said that the crucial factor is our attitude. And our attitude has made us guilty. I mean, it's like, remember when the judge looked out and said, look at the expression on the defendant Hoffman's face? It's the expression on our faces. That's what makes us guilty, because we look at the judge with total and complete contempt for everything he stands for everything that he believes in, and that makes us guilty. I think also that we're guilty in the sense that we wanted to see a major confrontation in Chicago. We wanted to see a polarization. In the sense that we're not guilty is that we're not guilty of the specific charges that the government has produced against us. They don't know what the real conspiracy is, because the real conspiracy is a spiritual thing. And how can you put someone in jail for a spiritual crime? Because, I mean, what's a conspiracy? The 8 of us did conspire. Even though I didn't even know John Freund's, I was still in a conspiracy with him because we were both part of the same movement toward creating that event. And so we are guilty of conspiracy, but every single individual, every single young person in America is guilty of this crime.
So how many people do you think there are in the conspiracy?
Oh, I think that every baby born is a member of the conspiracy, and I think that's what frightens the government so much. I mean, they actually hate us. You know, this is unlike any other criminal, criminal thing. I mean, we sit right next to them and rap to the 2 prosecutors, Foran and Schultz, and they have just like total contempt for us because it's 2 worlds. It's 2 worlds fighting. It's the world of one America that is dying and the world of another America that's growing up. And we don't respect their laws, and we don't respect their courts. And we're in it with our blood, and they know that, and they know that it's and what they get so pissed about is what they're using. We're using their court system against them. We're using the very weapons that they have perfected and turning it against them. I mean, Judge Hoffman has all the authority in the courtroom. We have all the power. He's scared to death of us. You know, we went to eat with him at the Standard Club.
I heard. Why didn't you explain that?
Yeah, well, see, like I have a desire to get to know the judge, to get to know the prosecutors, to see what kind of lives they live, what kind of environments they've created for themselves, what kind of food they enjoy, how much sex they have, how they raise their kids, how they relate to the people close to them. I'm very curious about it. The judge goes down a separate elevator and is walked by 2 federal marshals to a private eating place for lunch every day called the Standard Club. Now, it's interesting, the Standard Club is for Jews only, pretty much, which solves one question about the judge. We know the judge is Jewish, but there's been a heavy rumor going around that he was an anti-Semitic Jew, and that denies the fact that he's Jewish. In fact, there was one rumor that he converted to Catholicism, but that's apparently not true because he eats at a Jewish club. The club's 100 years old. It's all men. Females are not allowed in. It's about a block from the federal building. And it's like, just little men in white coats going around serving. So there's this businessman who invited somebody, who invited somebody, who invited somebody, who invited Norman Mailer, who invited Bill Kunstler, who got the idea, why not take a couple of defendants along?
So who wins?
Can you imagine the judge would have a heart attack? Here he is eating privately in his own little world, escaping from the rabble of the courtroom, and into the courtroom walk the very defendants that he thinks should be lined up and shot. In we walked into the lunchroom. It was the total shock. Jesse Jackson ate there 6 months ago, and people talked about it every day for 6 months. I didn't see Judge Hoffman at first. Then Dave said, there he is. And in the corner, in this gigantic table that would seat 10 people, was this tiny little man in a $200 suit, old dapper Julius. And Julius looked up and turned around, and total shock hit his face as he saw that he couldn't believe it. He called the manager over. He had to hurry talk with the manager, like his marshal. You know, what's happening? What are they doing here? Why are they here? So we moved, and we started moving toward him. Julius got up, moved the table back a little bit. We got in the seat, but we're still in Julius's line of vision. He then got out of his chair and moved so that his back would be toward us. We moved our chairs to another table to be directly into his line of vision, and then he moved his chair back to be behind a pillar. The entire meal, he kept looking at us. Total amazement. It's just his world was caving in. I mean, as he's been saying all along, never in my 50 years of being a judge have I ever seen defendants with contempt like this. And now here we are into his eating place. The beautiful thing about it is he'll never know now whether we're going to come into the Standard Club again. There's no place he can go where he's not going to be attacked by us. See, what the government is finding out is that there's a lot of different ways to infiltrate into the society. And Julius Hoffman, can never be free from our influence. After all, his kids probably identify with us. And when he hears them say a favorable thing about us, he just goes crazy. Schultz and Foran, the two prosecutors, they bring their kids, and we wave to them and so forth. And I know darn well that if I had a chance to talk to them, I'd have us on their side in a minute. And it's all a myth. Like, I was talking to two kids who were very close friends of Foran's family, two 16-year-old kids, and they said that in their Catholic high school, a lot of the kids say that they should be on our side because, after all, we represent youth and we're young. We ain't young. Where do you ever get the idea we're young? We ain't young. We're over 30. But it's our ideas are young. Our spirit is young. Everybody out there thinks that the defendants on trial are 14 years old. Dick Schultz, the number 2 prosecutor, is younger than I am. It's hard to do this tape because the words I say here will be held against me. Because if I tell the truth, who knows that this tape won't be subpoenaed by the government and entered into evidence. Because our words, our fucking words are on trial. We anything we say now can be brought into the courtroom and held against us, even if it's 2 years after the event. I could say I'm happy a riot took place in Chicago. Boom, it would be held against me. I could say riots are fun. Everybody should become a rioter. Riots are the only honest occupation you can have in America today, is to be an inciter to riot. Everybody should become an inciter to riot. That would be held against me. This trial has had a chilling effect on people's language. Because we're not on trial for murder. We're not on trial for assault and battery. We're not on trial for dynamiting. We're on trial for starting a rumor of going to Chicago. We're on trial for having an intent to start a rumor. We're on trial for having a conspiracy to have an intent to start a rumor. We're on trial for a language, for a simple language crime. The crime of saying, let's all come to Chicago and have a party. So dig it. Certainly people have to think twice now when they go around the country what they're going to say. And the country must really be frightened of collapse if it has to make language illegal. I think that's a good sign when a government's really in trouble. It has to make language illegal. And that's what this government's doing by putting us on trial. They want to prevent people from organizing national demonstrations. They know we're going to 1972 to the Republican Convention.
Now the question is, if I don't go to prison, or if I went to prison only very briefly, I assume I don't go to prison if I'm not convicted. So if I'm not in prison and walking on the streets, what would I do? Well, I think I would continue to work in the establishment of a multiple state network, abortion network, linked with women's liberation groups in different cities, which we've been able to establish through my running around and traveling, and link some of those groups together into a more effective force, both political as well as meeting the very specific needs of women for control over their own bodies. I think that I would take a strong line and try to promote gay liberation kinds of things that are starting. I think that's really important. I I think mostly, however, I would try to add in my clumsy way to some kind of constructed new form, which would somehow integrate cultural and political styles so that people would feel comfortable about who they are and not look for other people in other places to make the revolution for them, but to begin to be able to make it for themselves. It's clear the revolution in America proceeds exactly as far as we are. By we, I don't mean the defendants. I mean the folk that are listening. As far as our own consciousness takes it, that's exactly as far as the revolution is. And people are not going to make it for us. And we have to find some ways to bring together dope in the shotgun, I guess.
Abbie, how do you, now that the trial is almost over, how do you see the trial as having gone?
Yeah, well, it's long. It's sort of an agonizing ordeal in its entirety, but just remarking today, you can have an outburst, say, in the morning, or a whole drama being played forth, and then you break for lunch, and you come back, and what happens in the afternoon is entirely unrelated to the morning. It's as if you're watching, it's as if I've just seen something like 800 movies, and each movie is unconnected with the next, and these movies or plays get played out before my eyes right in the courtroom. I have a good seat. I mean, but it's quite I absolutely could not conceive of ever going to a play again after having seen the trial. Of course, I might not get the chance for about 11 years, but it's interesting. I mean, you get a full learning of the law and how it's used in this country, and how the trial is more a symbol than we even anticipated when we were talking about the trial before it happened, because it's quite clear that what is on trial is our very being, that the way we dress, the way we wear our hair, our attitude, our language, our defiance of authority in the courtroom, I think are the number one key issue on trial. Secondly, the second issue is what happened in the streets of Chicago, and the jurors and the judges and the prosecutors' view about law and order, the war in Vietnam, racism, cultural revolution, young people in general, marijuana, those kinds of issues. And third or fourth down the list, you'll get to evidence in the trial. But the evidence is, the judge will constantly say to the jury, you must disregard everything but the evidence. The evidence is as if it's some god, and it just shows that his concept of communication and the kind of authority and rigid structure that he's trying to protect or is wound up in the evidence is gone like some dinosaur into mud. I mean, anybody would know that the evidence is of very little relevance in this case. And secondly, I think the whole structure of the court system is just totally irrelevant and inappropriate. You see, there is this image. There's been a Walker Commission report. They've called it a police riot. There have been 27 books on what happened in Chicago. Everybody watched it for hours and hours on television. But somehow it's a big mess. And at last, now that there's a trial in a court, in a federal court, with two opposing sides, now we'll get to the truth. But nothing could be further apart from it. This, what's happening in the court is more removed from the truth of what happened in Chicago than any of the other forms of communication.
How do you feel the alternate lifestyle, has been put on trial both by the prosecution and by the defense?
Well, it's more than just a lifestyle. It's a total movement. For example, you'll have last week, say, Professor Kalish, chairman of the philosophy department at UCLI. He'll be questioned about how much money he gave to the resistance in 1967, a group that wasn't even active in Chicago. I'll go on as a witness, and I'll be questioned about a speech that I gave 3 weeks ago in Baltimore. Now, I mean, it's some weird Kafkaesque Brave New World trick of the imagination to figure out how a speech I gave 3 weeks ago is related to my intent in coming to Chicago, which happened almost 2 years ago now. But somehow the government can figure it out. And I think what's clear is that we are on trial for our every action, the actions that we did this morning. You know, we're on trial. This interview, interviews that we give with the press, speeches that we give. Press is going around, I mean, the government's going around subpoenaing them, because if they don't get us on this trial, they want to try us for obstructing justice, conspiracy to obstruct justice. I mean, they're like the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they're just determined to get their men. And we're in the same building that Jimmy Hoffa was sent away for 10 years, and they had a vendetta against him. The federal government wanted to put him away, and they tried him 3-4 times. It didn't matter, you know.
In other words, this isn't the only charge that came out of convention week.
No, I had 10 arrests in the year following what happened in Chicago. I mean, I no sooner did I get back in New York that the Justice Department, the FBI, the Internal Revenue Service were all lined up. I was visited 5 or 6 times within a week after that. I sort of had been discovered at that point, I guess you'd call it. But they know that the actions that were taken here in Chicago revealed too much about the democratic process in this country, how the convention was rigged from the beginning, and that the convention process is, in fact, a paper tiger. And it can be wrecked quite easily. I mean, we said that it was our aim to come to disrupt the convention. We didn't mean that we were going to literally get inside the hall, you know, and start pulling Hubert Humphrey's hair out, you know, and punching around Mayor Daley. No, we knew quite well that there would be thousands and thousands of guards and thousands of miles of barbed wire and helicopters and tanks and everything in the streets. We knew that that image itself was disruptive. That America was revealing itself, and the way it carries on its democratic process is no different than that which carried out in Greece right now under a dictatorship of Franco carries out in Spain. All it has to do is that people have to get up and exert their right to freedom of speech and assembly in a very forceful way and be determined not to be scared away, and the government has to mobilize this tremendous amount of force. And I think because of our action, Nixon knows full well that the Republicans cannot have a convention in 1972 in a major city in America. In fact, I doubt if any political party ever will again in the history of this country. I look forward to all political conventions being held in Hawaii from now on, because it's actually the center of the military empire. The United States has shifted eastward to Southeast Asia, and there they get the most protection, and it's hardest for the people, for large numbers of people who now, I don't know what, about 75% live in urban areas. It's hardest for those people, you see, to express their grievances and their outrage at the point of decision making. And of course, that is, in the American political process, that is the only point of decision making, or anything that resembles decision making.
Now that the conspiracy trial is almost over, and most people are pretty well assured that that the defendants, including yourself, are going to do time in jail, if not on the conspiracy charge itself, on contempt of court, do you think that this whole process is going to stop other people from expressing their dissent, in terms of their own lifestyle?
I think it does have a chilling effect. I mean, I think we have. There has been a definite slack in types of activity that have gone, protest activity on campuses and in the streets. I think that Nixon's policy of repression has proved somewhat effective. Sad to say that, but I think it has. I'm not so sure that we're going to lose on the exact charge. In fact, quite the contrary. I think we're going to win or get a hung jury, which is a victory, and it would be a clear victory in this case, a case in which the government has spent something like $5 million and 8 months with the grand jury and another 6 months on trial. I mean, poor Schultz there has been like living with the events in Chicago every day for more than a year, and he's going to blow his brains out when he loses the case, because they have no case, and I think we are going to win. in that sense. But I think the judge is going to commit an act of revenge and vengeance and send us away for a good number of years for contempt, ranging from, say, a year for the lawyers to 3 or 4, 5, possibly 5 years for Dave Dellinger, and the rest of us falling somewhere in between. There's probably some justice in it because we are guilty of contempt for the court. I mean, we were contemptuous the day we walked in. But I think we've done our job well. I mean, I think we've discredited the institutions of the court. We've delegitimatized that authority. I mean, you'll see movement people, probably 5,000 or 6,000 that have now come through and sat in the classroom of the court and totally dehumanized, totally sit there like puppets. I mean, they're taught, don't smile, they're told by the marshals, don't laugh, no fidgeting, none of this, no writing, no buttons, you know, totally searched, and they accept it. They accept this total process of being stripped of most of their goods on them, you know, and of their whole identity and of their personality, that they shouldn't laugh, they shouldn't moan, they shouldn't chuckle, they should exhibit no human emotion. And they accept it the way that the Jews accepted Nazi Germany, you see. And that's been one of the failings, because what we're trying to say by our actions is that this isn't the church. This isn't sacrosanct, and it isn't just order. The judge isn't the king, and he isn't a god, and justice doesn't flow from his brow, you know, the way all humanity flowed from the head of Zeus. And people ought to recognize that you know, that he's not, although he's a symbol of authority, he really has no power when you determine to struggle for what you believe in and to stand up for what you think is justice and right. And therefore, it's a conflict between our power and his authority, which we recognize as illegitimate. And, well, I think we're doing fairly well in that sense. And that's why I think people around the country who are active in the movement are sensitive to problems of civil liberties have to take an interest in the trial, because we already have a number of lawyers around the country doing extensive research on the whole issue of contempt, because contempt is the most tyrannical weapon that the judge has to use against people. It's subject to the least amount of appeal, and it's very difficult to get it before a jury and to get it switched from another judge, even though this judge is very personally involved in the case. So there are a number of court battles that have to go on and have to be fought around the issue of contempt, around the inevitability that the judge will deny us bail, for example, on contempt. And that whole process has to be fought, because we've now set the pace for movement trials. If defendants choose to go into a courtroom for a political case because they were involved in demonstrations or something like that, they cut their hair, they put on a suit and tie, they hang their head in shame for what they've done, the way trials have been conducted in the past, if they carry on that kind of a defensive attitude, it's not going to be a political trial, because you have to immediately take the offense. You have to say that the judge, the prosecutor, the government that's putting you on trial is the conspiracy, and they're the ones that are guilty. And it's a case of the criminals acting like the victims and treating the victims as criminals, and you have to adopt that attitude. So I think that trials like this in the future are going to be conducted in this way, and I think we have to really make our fight within the courts. I mean, there's now very competent legal authorities, like they have, for example, the head of the Illinois Bar Association, that says because of our tactics, which, I should point out, they're not disruptive of the court process as such. I mean, the trial can still go on. Many of the comments to the judge are very short. They're made out of the presence of the jury. Process of, say, not rising for the judge is done very early, and then people rise. I mean, they don't take up very much time, and they're not disruptive to the total process. But to the image of the court, you see, to the image of the court's dignity and decorum, as the judge refers to it, were tremendously disruptive. I mean, all of us have some concept of the media, You know, no, I know that I do a somersault, I do a handstance downstairs on the sidewalk, you know, in front of the court building on the day it opens, you see, that by the time that hits the East Coast or the West Coast, that was done in the middle of the courtroom in front of the judge, you see. And then the judge reads out in the paper the next day and say, I will not have my courtroom turned into a circus. But you see, nothing's happening in the room. But mythically, everything is going on in the room. I think people around the country have a view of this trial as one of total chaos, defendants fighting with marshals on the floor, people coming in naked, the judge jerking off in his chair, you know, witnesses standing up and screaming bloody murder, people running around with guns and bombs. And that's the image that we've created of the trial without actually having done any of those things. The whole thing's done with mirrors.
How do you feel the image of the courts in the minds of the average American has changed because of the conspiracy trial?
Well, I mean, Judge Hoffman certainly fits the bill. You see, one of the problems is, and Julius is a two-edged sword, because although he certainly shows up all the idiocies of a court, you know, and the idiocies of this law and the senility of the government, people can place the blame on him rather than on the system of the courts itself. You see, it's the same way that he's in a way acting out the Mayor Daley myth, which is people said, well, oh yeah, what happened in the streets of Chicago was a result of Mayor Daley, you see. Not recognizing that it was a result of outrage on the part of the people and that the democratic process does not serve the needs of the people and that a new kind of political system has to be developed in this country. They don't recognize that. You've got to choose a chief villain to explain the fact that young people, you know, got pounded and beaten in the streets and parks of Chicago. So the same thing goes on in the courts. Rather than deny, a liberal attitude is not to deny the legitimacy of the courts, you see, as an instrument in maintaining those in power, but they say that, well, he's an old kook judge, you know, that's what it is. But, I mean, he's no kookier than other judges. He's, by some standards, he's young. I mean, the Spark trial had an 86-year-old judge, you know, was older than Julius. Julius is old. I mean, old in his ways and old in his thinking and old. If you watch him, I mean, you watch today, the way in which he gets threatened is when you attack his little section of the ooze. He's like guarding this little section of the ooze, the primeval ooze. He's like some reptilian creature, you know, just sits in the corner of the jungle and this is my room, me and Mies van der Rohe, the world's foremost architect designed it, and you know, here it's all falling apart because we come in, you know, with our boots and hair and turn the table into a commune and put out a NLF flag or something or sit around and don't respect his authority. He attacks, he says, you cannot do that at the table of the government, you know. We say, hey, government's table. It's our table, man. It's the liberated zone, you know. They're lucky. They're lucky we haven't sentenced them to more. I mean, I sent Schultz a note today, again, saying, you know, for 50 grand we'd stop the trial and let them off, because it's quite clear in our minds that the trial has backfired for them. You know, that they ended up being the ones put on trial, discredited. But of course, you know, that's a risky procedure. Revolution involves risks, and you know, you can get your hair cut and your ass kicked and get sent off to prison, and that's where I suppose we're going.
On a personal level, how do you feel about going to prison?
I don't like it, I'll tell you. I mean, I've seen Johnny Cash. I'm not, it's not all a James Cagney movie. Let me see, I think I've had about 40 arrests, and about 28 or so of them have ended up in the trials. The most I've been in jail has been one night, and that one night has been a nightmare. And I'm not looking forward to spending, you know, a long time in jail. We're going to have a motion, though, at the end, if we're sent to jail, to have the time we spent on trial deducted from the sentence. I think about that'll be the first time that's ever been tried. I think we have the longest trial in history.
John, you and Lee Weiner in particular have become widely known, even notorious in the last few months, for being unknown. Would you talk about the special significance that has in what you represent in the case?
I think that that there are two elements about that. One is why were we indicted? Why pick out two people who weren't nationally known? Why pick out two people who weren't seen as part of the national leadership, if there is such a thing? Why pick out people who weren't the primary foci in Chicago? And I think that there's one answer to that can be given, and that is that if the Nixon administration, in this case, is attempting a trial balloon, the beginnings of overt repression against the movement, then the scenario it wants to draw is a scenario where it encompasses the entire movement. So you have Abbie Hoffman and Jerry Rubin as cultural revolutionaries. You have Tom, Hayden, and Rennie Davis representing SDS to some extent, and the anti-war movement in particular, the new left, so to speak. And you have David Dellinger representing the pacifist framework and the anti-war movement, clearly. And then, of course, to round out the scenario, it's good for the government to throw in two people from the academic community. That is Lee Weiner, who's a graduate student, and me, who is a university faculty member. And I think that what that does for them is to, in a sense, be able to provide a so-called chilling effect against the entire movement, because the people on the outside perceive the situation as being limited to no one, but being much more broad-based in the scope of the kind of repression that the Nixon administration would like to initiate. The second thing about being an unknown that's quite relevant is that in terms of the law, in terms of the repression that is likely to or possibly going to come down, it's important for people who sit in like positions, that is, people who are sympathetic, active, and even in some respects constant participants in the movement, but yet nationally unknown in many respects, to understand that the pervasiveness of the repression, the pervasiveness of the law is such that they can be part of these kinds of indictments, particularly conspiracy indictments, for doing virtually nothing, and that they can be indicted without having the kind of notoriety that people like Abbie or Tom might have. That what the Nixon administration wants to do is not simply to rid the movement of a certain kind of leadership, but it's to destroy the movement. It's to, in effect, destroy what's grown up in this country in the past 10 years, and which I think is represented, by and large, by the people in trial in this case. And I think what the trial has essentially given us through the media, through speaking, through literature, has been an ability to reach a large number of people around the country. Now, it's no panacea. I think that the one thing that may be important is that it may be important for us to go to jail, though. Even though a lot of people know about this trial, I think in terms of the movement, it may be important for us to go to jail, because I don't think that, well, as I said earlier, there's been no chilling effect. But at the same time, the movement still doesn't, I think, realize how serious the potential for the repression is. The movement doesn't take itself seriously a lot of the time, and the movement in many respects is defeatist, carries out a lot of activities in which we expect to lose rather than to win. We portray ourselves very often as victims rather than as warriors. And I think that this trial is going to prove one thing, and that is if people go to jail, the movement is going to have to take itself serious, and it's going to learn that it has to fight. It's going to learn that it has to, in fact, see itself as warriors rather than victims.
What discrepancy do you see in the way the 20 to 30 million people have been reached about this trial and what the trial has really meant? And another way to put that is, what has the media filter attempted to do to this trial?
Yeah, well, the media has acted in a classic kind of way. The media takes out the antics. They focus on people like Abbie Hoffman. They focus on the badness of the judge or the repressiveness of the courtroom situation. But they screen all the politics from the case. They don't in any way treat the judge as symptomatic of the American judicial system, and he is. He's been this way throughout all his trials, and he's certainly not an isolated kind of judge. In fact, since the trial began, we've come in contact with other people around the country who are in similar kinds of court cases, and their judges are all the same as Judge Hoffman. There's no big difference. And so one thing the media has done is screened out our own criticisms of the American judicial system as it exists on a broad level. The second thing it's screened out has been our politics. We can give press conferences and talk about the war and talk about racism, and the media will not pick it up at all. They'll pick up the fact that we criticize the judge for not letting in our politics, but they won't discuss the politics. And in fact, they refuse to deal with the issues. The media has particularly refused to deal with some of our very real criticisms about Vietnam, and even carrying that further, particularly about imperialism, of course.
What's been the effect of the defense, and for that matter, the prosecution, and this whole experience on the jury as you assess it now near the end of the trial?
I would say that unlike the Oakland 7 jury, they haven't been educated, although I'm not convinced of that. They haven't been educated to the political issues in the trial. They certainly don't seem responsive to the issues. But then I have no experience with watching juries in the past, so I don't know.
Were they not educated by Bobby Seale?
Well, I still think that there's a definite split within the jury. Some jurors were educated by Bobby Seale, although I think for them it was confusing because they were taken out of the courtroom at a moment's notice, and so they never got the entire context in which Bobby was operating, although being chained and gagged doesn't require much context. It's pretty symbolic by itself. But I would say, if anything, that thing has been the most crucial, easily the most crucial element of the trial.
There have been how many witnesses for the defense and how many for the prosecution, and what's been the effect on you personally just of the length of the trial and spending this much time in the city of Chicago?
There's been about 100 witnesses for the defense. There were about 55 witnesses for the prosecution. And spending this time in Chicago has been shit as far as I'm concerned. I hate Chicago. I think that nobody should live here if they don't have to. We've been so tied up with this trial that we have not been able to do anything in the city on a local level politically, that our presence in Chicago has been through the media at best, and that I think trials have a degenerating effect on people in general. I don't think they're good movement activity. I think that the people in this trial could have been more effective out in the streets rather than locked in the courtroom. And
Isn't that one of the reasons you're in the courtroom?
Well, I think there are inherent limitations in trying to put politics through a courtroom, although I think this trial has been as good as is ever going to occur. But that, I mean, without just destroying the courtroom, which I think is the way things should go.
If you don't go to jail, what'll you do?
Personally? Probably go to Boston or California, and I will probably start working on ecological pollution problems, trying to develop a national organization of political people concerned with it, rather than having it be co-opted by the Nixon administration or liberal reformers who simply want to reform the institutions of corporate capitalism such that they can rid themselves of pollution. But I don't think that's right. I think we need political people to function in that area to create some awareness about finally about why all that pollution actually occurs.
Do you consider Julius Hoffman part of the pollution problem?
I think Judge Hoffman is a pollution problem which should be dealt with like some of the... Never mind.
Bill, a very personal question. How do you think you have changed during the course of this trial? We can get into the more legalistic aspects of the trial a little bit later on in the interview, but while you're here, I'd like to get some ideas as to how you think you've changed or grown during the course of the trial as a person.
I've changed considerably. I've learned an awful lot about women's liberation, for example, that I did not know or have any real sympathy for. I've also learned how people can work together in an inexhaustible fashion to produce material, to publicize a case, to politicize it, to reach people, and I've watched that develop under the staff here. I've also learned that I am very much inclined to communal living and to the type of life where you do share your life with other people. That the going home at 5 o'clock to an isolated home which contains only one family unit is going to be very hard for me to resume. I would rather come home, I think, to a great many people living communally and having a sharing experience of that sort. I don't know whether at my age that's even possible any longer, but I have learned to like that very much and to be stimulated by it. I also have learned you can work like a bastard all day long, into the night, and that get up the next morning and still go through an exhausting day in court and feel exhilarated and stimulated by this type of contact, not just by the legalities of the case, but by the contact with the defendants, their girls, their wives, their mothers, their friends, the people that drop in off the street and want to work. And this creates a possibility in my mind that maybe a life can be molded in this fashion. I'm sure it's too late for me, but I think for many of the people that have passed through this trial, that it is a working possibility that such a type of existence, which has all these communal benefits, could be on a more or less permanent basis after the trial itself breaks up.
You mentioned sort of almost prophetically in the sense that you were going home after the trial. Do you think, in fact, that will happen? What was the judge's constant reminders that you're likely to be on trial yourself once this case is over?
No, I think there'll be lots of problems, but I'm thinking in very conventional terms of bail systems and so on, and the fact that I have other professional responsibilities to H. Rap Brown in many places and other defendants, that I will probably be practicing for some time before, assuming the worst, I have to serve time for what the judge considers contumacious conduct in this case. But I thought you were going to mention something else. I'm not sure where my home is anymore, because I've come to regard Chicago as a home. And I think that I will miss the city, people I've met and worked with, and for me to say home is Mamaroneck, New York is still very difficult.
What could you go into, Bill, some of the examples of the kind of conduct that the judge has cited thus far on the record as contumacious?
Well, he has taken every sharp exchange as contumacious. For example, at one time, the judge said, in answer to a question of mine, that why we had to come a half hour earlier on a Saturday when we were working one day later a week, that the answer was because. And I retorted that that was what a child answers when he's asked a difficult question. And then he intoned, let the record show that in the presence of the jury, the defense counsel called the trial judge a baby. That kind of thing is what's in the record. There have been many sharp exchanges, most of them having to do with unfair treatment by the judge as alleged by the defendants and their counsel. And he has said on many occasions that we would have to answer for that later. That was contumacious conduct, and we would have in the future to answer for it in his court or some other court. I think in the main, I don't think if I went back over the trial I would do any differently. These were hot exchanges in a heartfelt case where the stakes are high, not for the defendant so much in jail time, though that's high enough, but for the country as a whole. And I thought under those circumstances I had to be more aggressive in the courtroom than I had ever been in my life.
Did you feel hampered in any way along the trial? What with the judge constantly referring to the possibilities of contempt citations after the end of the trial, in putting forth the kind of defense that you would like to put forth during the course of the trial?
Yeah, I think we were greatly hampered. One of our main defeats, of course, was not being able to put the Attorney General, or the former Attorney General of the United States, on the stand, whom we thought had relevant testimony and who himself thought had relevant testimony. He was intensely upset when he left here after being refused even to testify in the presence of the jury after a screening process, which is the first time that I've ever heard of such being exercised with the willing witness. I thought his testimony would have been telling for us and very important, but he was prevented from so doing, and I think that was a body blow to us. There have been many other areas we've tried to explore, illustrating the motive and intent of the clients, like racism in the United States and poverty and other areas, the war, for which they came to Chicago in the first place, where he has blocked us completely.
So in other words, the jury doesn't even have a full picture with which to go in and deliberate at the end of the trial. They just have bits and snatches and perhaps what the marshals might communicate to them in the witness room, in the jury room at some point or another. What do you think, Bill, were the high spots during the course of this trial in terms of witnesses, in terms of drama, just in terms of general feeling of accomplishment during the course of the trial?
Well, in terms of witnesses, I thought we had a great many high spots, and without in any way derogating the witnesses whom I don't mention, I thought Allen Ginsberg was an extreme high point of the case. Because there a man got on the stand, and by his own strength of character and his own strength of endeavor, let the jury know what he's all about. And I thought Judy Collins was another one of those moments when she recited, and really, as only a fine actress could do, "Where have all the flowers gone?" I thought that the arrest of the lawyers in the beginning was one of the high points of the case, and the judges being forced to back down, both by probably pressure on him from sources I don't know, but also from the fact that 200 lawyers came here to protest what happened with those contempt charges. I thought Bobby Seale's binding and gagging, of course, was one of the tragic high spots of the trial, and maybe that did more to show the American public what was going on in the courtroom than anything else. There have been so many witnesses for us, over 125 I guess by now, that I would be hard-pressed just to fit each one in. But I do remember Ginsberg so well and Judy Collins so well. There have been others like Jane Meyerdink, the little Quaker girl, who was beautiful on the stand, and Sarah Diamond, the photographer, who described in really simple but eloquent prose what had happened to her, that it would serve no useful purpose to go through them all. It's just been a case with one highlight after another. Bobby Seale returning to take the stand, and even though he said some hard things, and had to be interrogated on a very rough speech he made here, it was good. It was a unity of political forces, and he said what he had to say, and the jury has to be confronted with that as well as with any other of our witnesses.
Bill, what do you think will happen with future major political cases like this one? Do you think that the trying of these 8 men is in some way symbolic of the attempts that the government will engage in the future to crush the anti-war movement, the peace movement, the black liberation movement, and the rapidly emerging women's liberation movement? Do you think they'll engage in these kinds of trials in the future, given the kinds of defenses and the kinds of attempts that the defendants in this case tried to present before the court, or do you think they'll use some other kinds of tactics?
Well, I think what happens in this case may be the gauge as to what happens in the future. I think what has happened in this case may be the gauge. If all political cases are fought this way, then I think it may be one weapon to strike back against a government that chooses its own battlefield. If we have to go into their battlefield, then it's got to be a real battlefield and has to be exploited to the fullest. And I think that this trial has been exploited to the fullest. I think that's one method that we may have. There may come a day when we say no courts at all, no lawyers, no courts, and that isn't the way we handle our problems. But while we're still in it, I think that the system here is amenable for the moment to this type of an approach. And I think that how this case comes out may well determine how future cases come out or how they're approached.
What kind of approach did the prosecution use in this case, Bill?
Very straight approach. They just put on a flock of police witnesses whose sole end was to show that the defendants or the people like the defendants were people who used fuck every other word and who had lifestyles that were different from middle America, such as smoking marijuana openly, having sex lives which were far freer than the kind of repressed middle-class countenances, from not shrinking from questioning every value of the society, including mostly the value of money as a measuring rod. And these policemen took the stand and tried to show that all of these things were true, and then tried to add to it the element of violence. Coupled with all of this, all of the type of strange life, according to contemporary standards, that these defendants or people like them had, they also would not stoop to, or they would stoop to using violent methods to overthrow the society so that they could establish their own. That's the kind of case I think they try to present.
And how would you classify the response of the defendant's case to the government's very straight case?
Well, it's been on, I guess, two levels. One level, of course, is to rebut what the government said they did by showing witnesses to show there really wasn't the defendants at all or their people, but the police who did all the dirty work. And then the second level was to show the lifestyle of the defendants. All ranges, from an Allen Ginsberg to a Timothy Leary to a Stoughton Lynn to a Congressman Conyers and so on, to show all stages of their life, the people they associate with, the people that work with them, the type of life they live, and so on. And to try to educate the jury that that life doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad or violent people.
Bill, do you think that the government will utilize this anti-riot law again to prosecute other people?
I think that depends, Mickey, on what happens here. If there's a hung jury, I think it may be a long time before they use it again. Or they will select very carefully the people they use it against so that they won't get a congealed, solid political mass against them.
What are your hopes for appeal? That's usually the traditional lawyer's approach. I know I'm not attributing that to you at all, but there are a number of lawyers in this community who have said that hopes for appeal are very great and that we shouldn't worry about what happens on the district court level because, of course, we can always go to the Court of Appeals or to the Supreme Court for that matter. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's very true. There's a lot of error in the record, I think. I could be wrong, but I think there's so much in the record that should we lose here, I think there would be enough grounds to sink a ship with. How many will be sustained depends on what's the composition of the appellate courts and how the country turns, because the courts are themselves governed by what goes on around them in the political world and not strictly by legal precedents. So I think they're good, but who knows?
Is one last question, Bill, is what happened in the courtroom here in Chicago, you think just a sort of one-shot kind of thing, or do you think that Judge Hoffman's court is pretty much like all courts in this country?
In one way, it's like all courts. The judge has all the power and the judge controls things pretty closely. In another sense, it's rather unique because he's a unique man. He is extremely bright man who just can't really bend to some of the things going around him. He's 74 or 5 years old, and suddenly he's confronted with this whole strange antithesis to his whole life. And I think it's very difficult for him to take, so it has caused an abrasive reaction, which I think has resulted in much of the stuff you asked in your last question about error in the record.
Leonard, could you tell us what the defendants in this case are being tried for?
Yes, this is the first federal trial whereby persons are being charged for having a certain state of mind as they cross a state line. Up to this time, federal crime could only consist of passing an identifiable object or person over a state line, such as the Racketeering Act, which makes it a crime to pass certain weapons and implements of the racketeering trade across a state line. The Mann Act, of course, involves the passing of a female across a state line for immoral purposes. But this is the first crime involving crossing a state line with a state of mind. And technically the charge is crossing a state line with a state of mind intending to incite, promote, or encourage a riot, which in this particular statute is defined as a gathering of three persons, any one of whom threatens or commits injury upon a fourth person or threatens and commits property damage upon a fourth person.
Well, that's the legal definition of what they're being tried for. Do you think it goes beyond that?
Well, of course, I think in the course of this trial, if anyone has had any doubts about the reason for their being indicted and tried under this case,
that doubt would have been resolved once you became familiar with the government's case. For instance, they have introduced into evidence to prove a state of mind speeches made by Rennie Davis in November of 1967, approximately 5.5 months before this law was even enacted. Speeches made by Tom Hayden before the law became enacted by Congress. And all of these speeches have to do with anti-war activities. Rennie Davis spoke to the Cadre, which is a resistance group in Chicago on that date. It's clear that the defendants were selected and indicted as a group representing the entire spectrum of social protest and dissent in the country. Indictments are usually handed down with the defendants named in alphabetical order. That was not the case in this case. The government first named in the indictment David Dellinger, pacifist, then named the two New Left and anti-war leaders, Tom Hayden and Rennie Davis, two Yippie founders, Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman, two members representing radical campus protest and dissent, Lee Weiner and John Freund, and finally naming Bobby Seale from the Black Liberation Movement as chairman of the Black Panther Party. So they encompassed in the indictment the entire spectrum of New Left, black dissent and anti-war dissent in the country.
So in other words, they're being prosecuted not only for their political views, but in the case of Abbie and Jerry, certainly for their lifestyles as well.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. The government has made frequent allusion in the course of the trial to the way the defendants behave, the way they look, the way they conduct themselves, and the way they looked and conducted themselves here in Chicago during the convention of '68.
Leonard, does this trial in a way represent a new kind of thrust in terms of political trials that you see coming up, let's say, in the next 2, 3, 6 months, a year?
Well, I think there will be political trials in the next year, but I think this trial, I think, is indicated to the government that this type of political prosecution doesn't work. I think they and most of the people who've observed this trial think that the government has lost substantially by initiating this case, regardless of the outcome. I think political trials in the future will be marijuana possession, the type of crimes that are usually prosecuted against the Black Panthers. I just don't think the government is going to again run the risk of a blatant, outright political trial which will gain the support of the traditional liberal establishment such as this trial has. From now on, I think it's going to be pot, assaults, possession of weapons, etc. Those will be political, maybe even more political than this case, but I think it's going to be more difficult for the defendants in those cases because you just will not attract the attention that this case has as a political trial.
What kind of defense have the defendants and the lawyers in this case been attempting to put forth in the courtroom? And do you think you've been allowed to utilize the kind of defense you would have liked to have used in the courtroom?
Well, considering the nature of the charge against us, the rulings of the court, the conduct of the prosecution, we've been able to get before the jury and into the court a considerable amount of evidence. We've planned the defense jointly, all the defendants participating in the planning of it. We've called over 100 witnesses. We've demonstrated our lifestyle, our politics before the jury. I'm satisfied that the defense that was presented is a fair representation of the political and social positions of the defendants. And if we're found guilty, we have no qualms about not being able to fully present ourselves in the courtroom. I think we've been able to do that fairly successfully.
Leonard, have you found that your experience in this trial has been considerably different from your experiences in other trials
As a lawyer, have you had a kind of special role to play, not just as a legal expert, but as kind of a political spokesman as well for the defendants?
Well, the one thing, of course, that immediately was different and that makes everything else different is that I don't live in Chicago, so like most of the defendants, I came here, and I've had to establish living here, which I did with some of the defendants. And I've never before lived with a client, or I cannot really call it clients. I've never before lived together with people while I'm going through a courtroom experience. And living together, working together, having conferences in the kitchen and the bedroom rather than in an office, conferring constantly with the people you represent as a team is clearly different than any other type of trial work I've done. And that has made it more political for myself personally. And it's completely personalized the experience in the way that attorneys don't frequently have the opportunity of being involved. So it has been different from that point on.
Well, you and Bill Kunstler have been accused of a number of things, both in and out of the courtroom by the legal profession and in some instances in the courtroom by the prosecution attorneys, accused of being mouthpieces, accused of being unprofessional. Do you find that this kind of unnerves you a bit?
No, most of it is really quite flattering. I think most professional attorneys who I talk to object to the fact that the defendants in this case have played such an active role in the preparation and delivery of the defense. I take that as a compliment. I think, in a sense, their feelings about their own profession as being a kind of a technical elite position is exposed when they criticize this trial. I think most of them object to the fact that it's a team effort, that the people who are on trial have as much say about what happens in the courtroom as the attorneys. And frankly, I think the profession finds that threatening.
Along with that, Lynn, there are obviously possibilities of contempt citations for not only for the defendants but for the lawyers in the case as well. Could you give some of your ideas about that?
Well, I think that the court apparently intends to impose contempt citations on Bill Kunstler and myself. Bill and I both take the position that we will not even think about this in the course of the trial. We haven't. Obviously, the intent of the court is to intimidate us with these threats, and if you plan around them and think about them, I think you're just playing into their hands. The judge remarked yesterday to Bill Kunstler, "You're a very brave man to continue in the face of my continuous citations of contempt for you." And that was a recognition on the part of the trial judge that no matter how many times he attempts to cite contumacious conduct, which it isn't, that Bill has continued, and myself to some extent, to actively pursue the defense in the face of that. And we can't take time to think about it. We'd just be knuckling under and playing into their hands.
Len, what do you think, what are your predictions for the outcome of the trial? Do you think that the evidence that's been presented thus far by the prosecution and the defense has had some kind of impact on the jury, or do you think they already pretty much made up their minds from the first day they were in court? And just in general, how does the evidence weigh on the jurors, and what do you think the role of the judge will be in somewhat hampering or hamstringing the jury in trying to bring back, for instance, a verdict of acquittal or, for that matter, a hung jury?
Well, we anticipate the judge, through his charge of the jury, will indicate quite clearly that the law is a very narrow technical one, and that given the evidence that the government has presented, the jury should have little difficulty in reaching a verdict of guilt. I optimistically feel that there are at least several persons on that jury who will disagree with the position taken by the court in its instruction. There's no real basis for
being able to predict an outcome like in most criminal cases. But we have a very difficult statute to deal with. We are dealing with a very difficult court. We have a prosecutor who at every step of the way has attempted to inflame and prejudice the jury against us. But in spite of all that, I still think that there is a hope that at least several, if not more, of the jurors will see through all of that, will understand the nature and the type of prosecution that's being directed against us, and will feel that it's part of their civic duty to not be a party to the erosion of the judicial process that's going on before their very eyes.
What do you think were the ramifications to the case, to the defendants, to the movement in general, to the severance of Abbie from this case?
Abbie, of course, was in Chicago at the time of the convention for approximately 16 hours, during which time he made one formal speech and a short impromptu speech in front of the Hilton Hotel before a very small gathering. Neither speech, of course, resulted in violence. As a matter of fact, both speeches, which have been taped and we have, were characterized more by an audience reaction that was jocular, that was good-humored, a lot of applause. Abbie, who himself was once a stand-up comedian, is a great tactician as a speaker. And as he said in the stand this morning, when he came into Lincoln Park, he had a very strong sense of the fact the park was under occupation, with the feeling that people in the park were in danger, including himself. And Abbie handled himself accordingly. To most lawyers, it's a complete mystery that he's in this case. He did not know a single defendant in August of 1968. He did not even know he was coming to Chicago until approximately 4 or 5 hours before he boarded a plane. Eldridge Cleaver was supposed to come as a speaker for the Peace and Freedom Party. When Eldridge couldn't make it, I believe Kathleen was supposed to come. Last minute, when she could make it, Abbie agreed to come in their place, and he flew out here. It's obvious that they put Abbie into the case for the reasons which I've indicated earlier in the interview. The government also attempts to characterize Abbie before the jury time and time again as a violent person. If Abbie would stand in the early part of this trial and respectfully, standing right at his seat, asking for the right to cross-examine a witness because his attorney was in the hospital, the judge would characterize that statement on the record as a violent outburst. It would be carried in the press and reported as being a violent outburst. It was Kafkaesque, sitting there and watching this whole process of a build-up and a change of a man's character taking place by virtue of statements by the judge and the prosecutor, with perhaps the most gentle man in the courtroom being the victim of it all. Something which the press has overlooked, and I keep trying to remind them, is that on the first day of the trial, when the judge entered the courtroom, the defendants, in protest to the authority of the court, refused to rise, all except for Bobby Seale, who constantly took the position that the court was to be shown respect, although not the institution which backed it up. For him to ultimately be in a position where he's chained and gagged required this whole change in atmosphere brought about by the government and the judge. And to sit there as a lawyer and to see this take place, not in a precinct house, not where these types of actions usually take place, but in a federal district court, was probably the most trying time I've had as a lawyer.
Len, assuming that the jury isn't going to be allowed to commit an act of civil disobedience by returning a verdict of not guilty, what do you expect the chances for the defendants are on appeal? What with the new Supreme Court appointments and so on?
Yeah, every lawyer I talk to glibly says the defendants will win the case on appeal, and there's I think there's no question but that there's ample error in the record. However, if people will study the history of appeals and political trials, they might be somewhat dismayed by what they find. So I'm not that optimistic. I frankly am more optimistic in front of the jury. I'm more hopeful in front of a jury, and I would prefer, of course, to win this case before a jury. Because given the law that's being applied against them, the court and the prosecution, if the government cannot get a conviction in this case, then I think that more or less proves the point that we've been trying to make throughout this trial, and that is that this is a gross perversion of justice by the government.
I went into the courtroom and I was sworn in by a man sitting on the other side of the judge, the side I was sitting on. I was eating a piece of candy and chewing on it, and he asked me to spit out my gum, and I said I wasn't chewing any gum. And then I sat down, and then Mr. Kunstler began questioning me, and he asked me about the first times that I had met Jerry Rubin, and I told him that that was in 1964, October of 1964, when I was providing the music for the march on Oakland to end the war in Vietnam, and Jerry Rubin was involved with the Vietnam Day Committee, the VDC it's called. And then we began, I began to talk about how I had met with Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman in a room at the Chelsea Hotel where I was staying with my band in February of 1968. And it was there that we first discussed the implications of a Yippie Festival for Life in Chicago to counteract the Democratic Festival of Death, which was the Democratic Convention being held in Chicago. I was allowed to talk, and I talked for quite a long time about how we felt about the festival, what it would be, whether there were going to be permits in the park or not, what a vicious fascist system existed in America, and how we felt responsible to do something about the oppressive measures of the establishment towards minority groups, and about the war in Vietnam. And then I tried to sing my song, The Fixin' to Die Rag, or as it's sometimes known, the Vietnam Rag, and I was stopped by the Sergeant of Arms, I guess, who came over, and I had closed my eyes and I was just singing rather loudly, and the judge began yelling at me to stop, and the Sergeant of Arms came over and tried to close my mouth by putting his hand under my chin, and so then I stopped, and then Mr. Kunstler got permission from the judge for me to say the lyrics of the song, and so then I recited the lyrics of the song, The Fixin' to Die Rag. And then Mr. Kunstler asked me the next time that I had seen Jerry Rubin, and I told him that I'd seen him at the Stony Brook College in New York, where the Yippies had attempted to put on a demonstration there, and Mr. Kunstler asked me if I would describe what happened there, but the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Schultz, objected, and the objection was sustained, and they didn't allow me to talk about what had happened at Stony Brook. Then Mr. Kunstler asked me if, when the next time was I had seen Jerry Rubin. I told him that we had met in Jerry Rubin's apartment in the late part of April. And at that time I had reported to him that young people that I had talked to around the country were not very responsive to the possibilities of having a positive music festival in Chicago at the time of the Democratic Convention, because everyone was very, very paranoid because of Mayor Daley's shoot-to-kill order concerning the riots in the ghetto, because of rumors of them preparing concentration camps, mobilizing 2,000 vigilante deputies to arrest demonstrators, and preparing the sewers as dungeons to put demonstrators in. We then talked about what positive things could happen at the festival. More entertainers, circus clowns, jugglers, basketball teams, and we discussed the possibilities again of acquiring permits for the parks in order to allow everything to happen legally. They said that they were having a little trouble getting the permits, but they probably would get them. Then we discussed, Mr. Kunstler asked me about if I'd been in Chicago, and I told him that I had played in the Electric Playground, Electric Theater 3 days before the beginning of the convention, and at that time I saw Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman, and I informed them that I was withdrawing my support and the support of my band from the festival, and withdrawing our participation from the festival because of the rather obvious threats of violence around the convention and the festival. Then I attempted to describe what happened to me after after I had played at the Electric Theater and was going home, and Mr. Schultz objected, but then the objection was sustained by the judge. No, the objection was overruled by the judge, and I told how I had been attacked by 3 guys in a hotel lobby along with my organ player, David Cohen, and my nose was fractured, and I had to go to the hospital to have it fixed, and then the next day we left. Then I was cross-examined by Mr. Schultz, the assistant prosecuting attorney. He was all the time that I was testifying, the prosecuting attorney, his name is Foran,
Yeah.
was glaring at me, a very vicious, cold sort of expression on his face, almost sneering, and Mr. Schultz got up and tried to attempt to get me to indirectly make statements which would help his case, such as, did Abbie Hoffman tell you that he had said that there was going to be a violent confrontation with the police? And my answer being no or yes would affirm that there was a possibility that Abbie Hoffman had at some time actually said that. He attempted to ask me whether I had known that Abbie Hoffman said that people were going to fornicate in the park. I refused to answer these questions because they were misleading. I was told to answer. I finally had to answer no. Then he attempted to, for some reason, to get me to say that some of the performers that I had talked to about playing in Chicago had wanted money for their playing there, but I kept asking him to rephrase his question, and then eventually he just gave up, and that was the end of questioning. Well, in the beginning of the trial, I was asked by Mr. Kunstler what I did for a living, and I listed many things, because I do many things. Help to produce records, record records, perform in a rock band, perform as a single artist, act in movies, act in television. I'm a minister for the Universal Life Church. I'm a father, a husband, poet, author. And as I was listing out these things, he whispered that I was a jerk. At least that's what I'm told.
Well, I came in as a defense witness, and
finally went on the stand on about mid-afternoon, and the things that Bill Kunstler wanted to question me about were mainly my connection and participation in the mobilization activities starting back in, or at the time of the April '67 demonstration at the UN in New York, and then right on up to the present time. My name is, I'm Stuart Meacham, and I'm the Peace Education Secretary of the American Friends Service Committee, and am now one of the co-chairmen of the new MOB. And so he started in questioning me about the April 15 thing and also the October 21 thing at the Pentagon. And every question that he would ask me practically, except my name, Foran, the top lawyer for the government, would jump up and object, and the judge would sustain the objection just almost automatically. The thing that really surprised me was when we got to the October 21 thing at the Pentagon, I had known that there had been a good deal of testimony about that had been entered into the record already by some of the prosecution witnesses that were, trying to lay a groundwork for trying to prove that the manner and the style and the basic motivation of the leadership of the Chicago thing, as far back as then, had been violent and obstructionist. And so I was quite willing to, to testify as to what I had observed, not only in meetings when the October thing was being planned, but also when I was there and saw it. But every question that Bill Kunstler would ask me, Foran would jump up and object, and the judge would just automatically sustain the objection. So finally, we got on over into 1968 at a couple of meetings that I attended, one on February 11 here in Chicago, and one in March at Camp Villa, when plans were being made for the Chicago action. And even that was almost as vigorously cut off as far as any testimony was concerned by Foran's objections and the judge sustaining him. At one time, the judge cut in and gave me a lecture because I was calling Dave Dellinger Dave rather than calling him Mr. Dellinger. And he told me I should call him Mr. Dellinger or David Dellinger. He was a very strange kind of a judge. Well, that was about the way the thing went. I had a very strong impression that he was not anxious really to know what I knew or to hear what I had to say. And certainly the prosecution wasn't. They didn't want to hear any testimony about my own basic attitudes and beliefs. At one time, Bill Kunstler introduced a paper that Tom and Rennie, Tom Hayden and Rennie Davis had prepared for the Camp Villa meeting, and it was distributed there. And it was a proposal about for the kind of action and the tone and the character of the action that they thought ought to occur in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. And there was one, it was a very good paper. It's actually, I reread it before I went on the stand. I was very much impressed with it all over again. I'd first seen it at the time of the Camp Villa meeting, and it had a section in it that stated very clearly that the action should be nonviolent and legal and all of that. And Bill Kunstler wanted to get that introduced into the record as a part of this planning meeting in August when the when the Chicago action was being planned. And so he asked me if I'd seen the document before and had read it. And at that point, the Foran objected again, and he wanted to read the whole document. Well, it's about 21 pages, and they took out 45 minutes while he read it. And then when we got back in, he objected to it being introduced on the ground that it was written by Tom and Rennie rather than by me. Well, he could have told that the first 2 minutes, But and the judge immediately sustained the objection. And then Bill Kunstler said, well, suppose, he said, this is an important document to our case. It shows the motivation of two of the defendants and their analysis and what they were wanting to plan. And if I can't introduce it now, and suppose we have Rennie Davis or Tom Hayden on the stand, and I try to introduce it then, will you sustain an objection by the government on the ground that it's self-serving? Well, the judge said that's irrelevant. Let's go on. I don't know whether they'll ever get that document introduced or not, but that sort of is an example of the kind of difficulty that the defense, it seems to me, runs into in getting any kind of information on the stand. Then when I was finally on this morning to conclude my testimony, they asked me about events that I'd observed here in Chicago during the Democratic Convention. I got out here late. I got here only on Thursday of that week and arrived at Grant Park that afternoon at about the time that Dave Dellinger was announcing that the activities of the national mobilization for the week in Chicago were now being concluded. He made that announcement out in the park that afternoon, and I happened to walk up just as I heard Dave making that announcement. Well, I testified to that, and then on cross-examination, Foran would say, did you hear Tom Hayden say that we must smash the fascist pigs? I would say, no, I didn't hear anybody say that, Tom or anybody else. Did you say so-and-so say this? He would go through this long catalog of things, you know, that he wanted to know whether I'd heard. Well, I'd already told him that the only thing I'd heard Tom, Rennie, or Dave say was just this last statement I heard Dave say, and the rest was just greeting them. But he wanted to list a long catalog of bad things that he was hoping, you know, he knew I hadn't heard them, but he wanted to say them again so that apparently these were things that somebody had already said they'd said, and he wanted to say them again so the jury would have these things planted in their minds. And then one of the last things he asked me about, I'd testified earlier that at this February 11 meeting here in Chicago, a number of people had been present, and among those I listed was Charlene Mitchell, who had been the presidential candidate of the Communist Party in the fall elections in '68. And he asked me, he said, did Charlene, he said you testified that she was at the meeting. I said, yes. He said, did she run for public office? And I said, yes, I understand she did. And he said, what office was it? I said, well, you know, I can't really clearly remember. And I really couldn't. I wasn't dead sure whether it was for president or for vice president. But I said it was one of the two. And he said, and what party was that? And I said, the Communist Party. So he said, that's all. And that was about the level that he seemed to be casting his whole case. At one time just earlier, during the direct examination, I had mentioned the fact that I had gone to Hanoi to bring back some pilots from Hanoi, and that Tom and Rennie Davis had had a role in getting, you know, asking me if I would go, selecting who would go, and then I'd talked with Tom some about the whole trip in Paris on our way to Hanoi. And so he asked me, he said, you mentioned the National Liberation Front. This was Foran, the prosecuting lawyer. He said, you mentioned the National Liberation Front. Is that commonly called the Viet Cong? I said, well, I always call it the National Liberation Front. He said, but don't a lot of people call it the Viet Cong? And I said, well, the judge reprimanded me the other day for calling Dave Dellinger Dave, and he wanted me to use the correct name of everything. So I was using the correct name of this, the National Liberation Front. And the judge got all excited then, you know, and he wanted the question read back, said, is this sometimes called the Viet Cong? And I said, yes, it sometimes is, but I always say the National Liberation Front because that's the correct name. Then he wanted to know, he said, you referred to the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Is that also sometimes called the Hanoi government or the North Vietnam government? And I said, well, I guess it is. I sometimes call it the Hanoi government or the North Vietnam government. And but I generally call it the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Well, that was the level he was casting the whole thing on, and obviously to attempt to create some sort of apprehension in the minds of the jurors that there's something sinister and leftist and communistic about anybody who believes that it's wrong to try people for conspiracy because they're against the war. I sat there and it just seemed to me that it's a strange kind of thing in this very criminal and atrocious war that the only people that are being tried for crimes in connection with it are people that are for peace. And the real war criminals, the people who have committed the crimes against humanity and the crimes against peace and who have set the policies and devised the weapons that have created the Song Mis, nobody even thinks about trying them for their war crimes. And this trial, it seems to me, is a perfect example not only of how the courts and the Congress has been taken over and not only how the national elections and the Congress have been taken over, but also how the courts have been.
And today you were put on the witness stand by the defense in the conspiracy trial. Briefly, could you relate the type of knowledge that was extracted from you today in court?
Well, I was good at babbling about meetings in the past with Abbie and Jerry, like the famous meeting at the St. Mark's Baths, where Jerry Rubin and I drafted the main Yippie fundraising letter, clad in terry cloth kilts and eating psilocybin sponge cake in late March '68. And I was generally good at denying the prosecution contention that Abbie and Jerry had publicly and vociferously indicated that there would be incredible violence, or that violence was a direct was a direct scheme or plan of the Yippies and the people that were planning the various activities of the Festival of Life.
How did the prosecution, how did the government react to your testimony?
Well, they liked all the smut, it seemed. I mean, the guy kept asking me about, I had one schema I had written for the underground papers on August 7th and 8th that indicated a poetic format of the Yippie demonstrations in the event that there were no permits. And one of the paragraphs said that there would be public fornication wherever there's a willing aperture and an aroused appendage. And Schultz, blushing like a Fordham law student, came, on the cross-examination, was very excited. Seemed to be very excited about that, and wanted to know how that related to Yippie myth. And I told him that, well, it really didn't, because the last public fornication was when the armies of Alexander the Great had public fornication celebrating Alexander the Great's marriage to a Babylonian princess.
How do you feel Judge Hoffman and the jury reacted to your testimony, particularly when Schultz tried to bring out all the smut involved within the Yippie myth?
Well, the jury, the various, they certainly were prepared for it. I mean, they certainly showed no surprise, although it woke some of them up. It's just like a psychic alarm clock. When they hear a four-letter word attacks the subconscious, and evidently, and it wakes a lot of them up, as though the dream state wakes them up. But it was interesting. I don't know. We always like to be a juror, trapped without cultural sustenance for 4 months, listening to a Hoffmanian nightmare,
How did Julius the Just seem to react to your testimony?
He kept asking me if I had any smut. No, he kept, he was very nervous, always twittering and twatting, and when I'd read something, he would sigh occasionally as I read, because I tried to read slow and with a certain amount of articulation. So he would cluck and sigh and wince and tap his footstool and shift around and make notes. But it generally seemed to leave me alone, I didn't have any hassles with him, really, in that I was able to testify along most of the lines I wanted to, and I really didn't have any confrontation with him to speak of. He kind of left me alone. Why, I don't know,
Many of the questions directed to you by Attorney Leonard Weinglass for the defense were objected to by the government. One would almost feel that the government objected to him solely because they felt that the defense would help the defense win its case.
Right. Well, they did not want me to indicate in the dealings I had with Jerry and Abbie, for me to indicate that there was absolutely no violence planned for the Democratic Convention, which is the only contention of the prosecution is that Jerry and Abbie went around saying, on the one hand, let's have Festival of Life, and on the other hand, let's kick ass, and that really didn't happen, you know. And that Jerry and Abbie never discussed buttock breaking, only we're discussing a Festival of Life and rock and guerrilla theater, etc.
Do you feel that what happened in court today to you and to your testimony, do you feel that changed your awareness of the American judicial system?
Well, it shows, it does speak something for this type of trial. I mean, it certainly must be a way of enacting justice without all this. It was like a leukemia ward or something. I mean, it was just like this sustained pain evident in the face of the jurors, and this sustained, debilitating aura of creepiness that just bounced off the walls in ceaseless droning and droning and droning. It was like a drone. It's like, God, some satanic harmonium droning away in the brain. It was terrible.
When you first, began to work on the Festival of Life, early 1968, did you feel that the government would go to such outrageous ends to put its organizers in jail?
Well, no. One never thought that there would be such an outcome. First of all. Until March 21st, when Johnson abdicated, it was obvious that it was just going to be a big shoe-in for Johnson, and that it would be. And I think that had Johnson run, there would have been this incredible, just a big, huge demonstration like the Pentagon, and everything would be cooled out. But because Humphrey was listening to all those creepo liberals like Abe Fortas and others, I believe along with Tom Hayden, that there was an overt decision by Democratic Party liberal types to stomp out the demonstrators so that Humphrey could counterbalance the claims of Nixon that they would be soft on law and order. And I tend to agree with that, I think it's all off. All the Democratic Party did it. And now the trial is an act of vengeance enacted by the Democratic Party enacted through Daley, I guess, and the Justice Department, the Democrats in the Justice Department. I don't know what I'm saying, but I think I feel it. I feel it's vengeance.
My name is Paul Krasner, and I just finished testifying at the conspiracy trial, and I plead guilty. Because that's the truth, because I'm as guilty or as innocent as those who, the particular spectrum of scapegoats who are on trial. It's just that arbitrary. My particular motivation was just to have them not cross-examine me because it couldn't accomplish anything, and to get the Catholic priest on after me.
And I'll tell you very frankly what my feeling in Chicago was. I had a feeling it was going to be a very bad deal. And I stayed away, thought it over very carefully, and stayed away because I felt that at the time that I would be perfectly safe because of my clerical garb and my age. And I would be, in a sense, leading young people into situations where they would not be safe and they would be hit, and I wouldn't do it. As it turned out, I would not have been safe, you see.
Had you known that, you might have come.
I well might have come had I known how berserk they were going to get.
Many people feel that the police action during the Democratic Convention, the conspiracy indictments, and the murder of Fred Hampton and other Panthers signals a new era of repression in this country. Do you think this is true?
I don't think it's any change. We've always, it's bad, but it's been bad. It was very bad in the 30s. Right here in Chicago, at least
they didn't kill anybody in 68, and in the 30s, the Memorial Day Massacre, was that 38, I guess it was. They killed many people. Same police force. It was a much worse deal, and they killed black and white, and that time mostly white, they killed and beat and clubbed them, and the women were hurt too. That was a vicious, wild, and the history of our country we are not a peace-loving, freedom-loving country. I mean, we are just doing as we've done.
In terms of systematic violence, do you think the anti-riot law being tested out in the conspiracy trial establishes the legal basis for a police state?
You don't need it. If the sentiment grows for a police state, we'll have it. Regardless of the law, we'll have it. The law is the law any worse than the Smith Act, any worse than the things we did in the McCarthy stuff and McCarthy era. But the thing that I see, I see no diminution in the forces that are against the police state.
Now, is that different from other
Yeah, they're better. There's more opposition to it, and more intelligent opposition to it, and a broader base to the opposition to it than we ever had in the past.
Rennie, you were one of only 2 of the 7 remaining defendants to take the stand, and you were on the stand for a long time. What was your purpose in going on in the first place?
Well, I think unlike the parade of witnesses we've had, really touching every part of our movement, with a multitude of objectives, perhaps the major one being to try to discredit the court system the way we discredited the political process in 68, and trying to project our politics to the country, especially to young people and to black people. When I took the stand, I thought that it was really a time when a defendant ought to attempt, at least, to speak to the other America that sort of sits in that jury box, that at least with a jury has gone through an incredible 5-month political experience of their own. But to try to take our politics, our culture, our radicalism, and to present it in a way that was comprehensible to those 14 people that have lived through this experience with us. It's a difficult undertaking, because on the one hand you have to put in very comprehensible terms why it was that the Yippies and the mobilization came to Chicago, what their objectives were, why faced with the potential of 500,000 people protesting the war and racism at the amphitheater at the time of the Democratic nomination, Johnson and Humphrey decided to basically suspend the Constitution, roll in the troops and the barbed wire around the amphitheater, and scare away the people with jobs, the people with families, the people who could not afford to be arrested. Why it was that faced with that kind of armed camp, police state buildup, we decided, unlike Allard Lowenstein and the McCarthy supporters and the liberals, not to call off our demonstration, not to discourage people to come, but to urge those people who were willing to face the troops and the bayonets to come on to Chicago anyway. And to say all of that in a way that would get before the jury, given the way Judge Hoffman defines the rules of evidence. Now, the experience of all the witnesses up to my going on the stand showed us that the only way that you can get any evidence into the courtroom is through a fairly stilted kind of a framework where a defendant is in a meeting and a police agent is also represented and has had some testimony about that. And you have to have a conversation in which another defendant is present, and you can then relate in that context who said what. You can't basically testify to very much else. You can't make political speeches. You can't talk about your motivation. You can't talk about what shaped your political thinking, even through the last 10 years, much less, shaping it all the way back to grade school or high school or something of that kind. All of that's inadmissible in this courtroom. So I had to sort of, in preparing, go through the 400-odd meetings I had been involved in, leading up through the year to the convention itself, and to choose meetings where essentially I could put together a theory and an analysis and put it together in a way that was basically devoid of movement rhetoric and incomprehensible language to the jury, but it explained it in a way that was totally understandable. At the same time, while I was trying to explain why we came to Chicago, why the mayor reacted the way he did, why it was natural that he would react the way he did, and then why we came on anyway. While doing this, it was also necessary to try to explain to the jury why it was that the government had produced 70-odd undercover agents and police officers who had a totally different view, that our purposes were to dynamite the International Amphitheater, to storm the Conrad Hilton and the like. Why in all of the conversations that I was going to testify to, police agents who had been in those same conversations had said that we wanted to kill pigs, we wanted to put people on viaducts, to shoot the shit out of community people, why it was that the general, why the intelligence came forward in the manner it did, and why even Dave Dellinger's pacifist march to the International Amphitheater on the night of the nomination was, in fact, according to police informers, a diversionary tactic for Tom and me and the crazy people to run wild in the loop with our mill-ins and busting windows and tying up traffic and the rest. So I tried to explain the mentality of the paid police informer, what kind of person he is. To show it's the police informer that's constantly proposing the provocative acts. It's a police informer who's sitting in a meeting and hears certain key words, yanks those words out of context and turns them on their head, and then files a report to the mayor or to whoever. And trying at the same time to, to humanize the whole experience, so that a jury that's hardly a jury of our peers, but is a jury of, American middle class and working class people can relate to.
Do you think that your testimony was successful? Did it communicate with the jury, and did it communicate with anybody else?
Well, I think that it was. I think that the jury, as we know, is very divided at this point, very polarized. Any witness that we put on the stand, there's sort of 2 or 3 regulars who will listen, pay attention, make open kinds of facial expressions to our witnesses, and the rest of the jury sort of ignores them or looks the other way or looks, down on the floor. My feeling was that by the end of, by the end of my testimony, in large part because I was a defendant, that and really trying to speak to the jury, and not to the press, and not to the defendants, but to the jury. Yet by the end of my testimony, that the jury as a whole was attentive and really with me, and at least relating to what I was trying to say, if not fully agreeing.
Did that include Judge Hoffman himself, who at one point you had to stop and wake up?
No, the judge kept falling asleep through a good part of my testimony. It was a lot of interesting observations about the judge. You're sitting only about 4 feet away from the judge, and the judge is absolutely going out of his mind, having this criminal side by side his elbow. When the judge, for example, gets up after the court's in recess, he sort of moves anxiously, cautiously, past you. I'm sort of standing in the witness chair, and the judge has to walk behind me. And the first time I noticed his paranoid was quite by accident. He was walking behind me, and I just sort of turned around and tried to, left right behind him, and the just my sudden motion right behind him so frightened him that he just drove himself right into the wall, and there was sort of this thud against the wall as he reacted to my motion, and then he quickly scampered out of the door. And from that time on, he always made sure that there were two marshals right by the door waiting to pounce on me and put a .45 caliber bullet in my head, I suppose, if I made another similar kind of jerky motion. Other interesting things is how he studies our document. We had Tom and I had written a very long paper describing mobilization plans for the convention and a whole election year offensive in 1968. And in this paper, we were trying to argue with the movement why we thought the militants that could be achieved at the time of the convention was a militance really of numbers rather than small group actions. Of course, as it turned out, it was a small demonstration, and much more militant kind of activity was really called for in Chicago because of the police state conditions that we faced. But in the original planning, at least, we had high hopes that it would be massive in numbers, and that the International Amphitheater area would just be paralyzed with hundreds of thousands of people. And we felt that it was essential in order to achieve this number that the demonstration attempt to get a permit, that it be legal, that it be nonviolent, and that more creative kinds of actions be organized on a decentralized basis out of movement centers. And so we argued this in a position paper. Probably the clearest statement of our intent, at least, in coming to Chicago. And the government obviously didn't want the paper given to the jury, and so got up and made some kind of nonsensical legal argument about why it shouldn't be admitted. It was self-serving, I think, also irrelevant and immaterial, and other useful legal points. Then the judge, after he hears the objection from the government, is obligated under the law then to study the document and to consider whether or not, in fact, it is irrelevant, immaterial, or self-serving. So he was sitting there going through this document, and it was fascinating to me because I hadn't realized up until the time I was on the witness stand that he never reads any of these documents. He doesn't even pretend to read the documents. He turns like 4 pages at a time. His eyes, if you watch his eyes carefully, they sort of start at the top of the paper, then they sort of shoot off to the side of the paper, then all the way onto the floor somewhere, and then back to the page for a few minutes, and another 4 pages turn over. And as I watched this process, I pointed out to the courtroom that the judge hadn't even read the paper, and he got very incensed and ordered a marshal to come over to the witness stand and turn me around so that I wouldn't observe his habits.
This whole trial, of course, has been a confrontation like the convention between life forces of the 70s and death forces of the 60s. It also takes place in what is officially known as an adversary system of law. You met an adversary under the best of circumstances in being cross-examined by Tom Foran for 2.5 days. Who won?
Well, I thought that Foran was a punk, and that Foran got his ass kicked. I would really have liked, for there to have been more of a man there, to have been more of a person who genuinely believed in what he was doing, or at least had the smarts about what he was trying to do, and thought he was could get away with it. But Foran sort of is this daily hack who I had met several times before the convention. He achieved fame in Chicago by the his active involvement in urban renewal. He was directly responsible for the displacement of tens of thousands of black people in this city from their homes. He went on to become the U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. And in many ways, I think Foran had a very important part to play in the formation of this indictment. In fact, he had received direct orders from Attorney General Ramsey Clark, who wanted to testify about this in the courtroom and wasn't allowed to, that he was not to bring on indictments against the demonstrators. He was to investigate police conduct during the demonstrations. And instead, like 3 days after he'd received this order from his own boss, the Attorney General, he followed the orders of his real boss, the mayor, and brought down the convened the grand jury and brought the indictments against us. I don't know. I mean, looking at him while he's cross-examining, it was really an incredible experience. He attempts to turn his body and his facial expression into a kind of ferocious animal, snarling and graveling and snorting his questions in a way that's aimed basically at trying to intimidate. And I suppose that, in some courtrooms that might be an effective technique, but the overall impression, I think, was that he was basically just trying to badger and push and shove, and really didn't have facts. And after the first hour or so, it really kind of proved to be a bore. It was sort of a bore until really the last hour, when he became very highly political and started screaming at me about my relations with the Vietnamese and my speeches to young people across the country, urging them to spread the mutiny that was started by Company A in South Vietnam and every factory and community and schoolhouse of the country. And wasn't it a fact that I urged young people to carry out activities of insurrection and revolt and so on? And his final question was, and didn't you tell a reporter on August 30th, the day after the convention ended, that we had won America? And my answer to all those questions was basically yes. And I said all those things and was glad of it. And I just would basically buy back all his language and restate it for the jury, giving me really my best opportunity to make a political speech to the jury.
The trial is close to an end, and there are, of course, various possibilities about the verdict and the contempt and the sentence, etc. But within the framework of any of those, coming as it does at the end of a pretty clearly marked 10-year period, and coming too as it does clearly at a transitional point for the white movement, what kind of assessment and advice and recommendation do you have at this point to the movement in general?
To stay out of trials like this one.
Well, what can I tell you about the trial? It's boring a lot. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes we get to say what needs to be said. A lot of times we don't. Mostly the court's a weapon in the hands of the government, being used in an ongoing political war against not really us, but who in the fantasies of the government we represent. Sometimes we've been successful in grappling with the government, trying to turn their weapon around on them. Mostly, I guess, we've only been intermittently successful. When we are, it's terrific. And the government falls dead, at least for a little second of time. The judge goes crazy. Foran, Schultz go mad. But they don't die, they spring up eternal. I guess the trial for me has kind of been a forced performance, not being a publicly noticed exemplary actor like some of my brothers. It's kind of forced me to adopt a style of work which is kind of like accepting the burdens of exemplary action or exemplary actors with not really having the full choice of it all. What I mean by all that is that there's lots of different ways to work in the movement, and my own style has been in the past quiet, organizing, trying to keep my own head straight, trying to stay free, strong as I can be. And while it's always been necessary for some people to be highly visible and take on the joys, certainly there are joys in publicly noticed performances, Jerry, Abbie, Tom, Rennie, Dave. Burdens are immense. The pressures are great. And I've always felt that that what can be fully accomplished by that, while necessary, is not a kind of accomplishment that I wanted to do. I've had the charming experience while being on trial and running around and talking a lot at different universities and places like that, that kind of magical belief that at one time, I guess every organizer has always had, that somehow if you just say the right things in the right place, things will fall into place, and you can leave after a relatively short period of time and leave something to the people to work with, work in. Mostly, I guess, it's struggling to stay alive and feeling, and to make and carry whatever political message is possible to carry to people, give them some way to relate to the madness that's our trial. And I suppose show them that people can grow up to be past 30 and have made a lot of mistakes and still have long hair and talk like reasonable human beings and enjoy dope and not be embarrassed about knowing as much about shotguns as you do about dope. And I guess the tension in the trial and the consequences of the trial for me has been a kind of conflict in magical thinking. I've always been willing to be magical, but the heavy dependence on magical work of a star-studded performance, trying to bring a word to people, it just kind of goes against my way. You're asking me, Mike, when I say the court is mad, or that the courts themselves are illegitimate, what I kind of mean by that. I guess the madness, the insanity of the court kind of moves along in a lot of different ways. Obviously, the most immediate kind of thing is just the craziness of the participants, us, and more particularly them. But more critically than that, more critically than the looniness of dozens of 6'3" marshals in the courtroom, and the kind of glaring insanity out of the judge's eyes about our hair and our disrespect to the court, slouching in our seats, third grade like we're told to sit up straight. The judges, I remember Rennie, when Rennie finished testifying, we all Rennie was trying to be cool, and kind of come back and sit down. We couldn't let him. Tom jumped up and hugged him. We all jumped up, touched him, hugged him. The judge screamed out, really, I've never been in a courtroom where there's been so much physical affection displayed. We shouted back, right on. The kind of insanity that's like, we produce a witness who come on with a coherent statement about what we believe, what they believe. And the government is overjoyed, and we're overjoyed. We're overjoyed because we've been able to bring in our politics, our lives, our style into the courtroom. The government's overjoyed because we're able to bring in our politics and our style into the courtroom. They see it as a thing that's going to screw us with the jury, and we see it as a thing that's necessary to put before the jury. So the same event will be defined by both sides as, aha, we won that one. It's the day-to-day things, events in the courtroom that make it crazy. For a long time, for years and years, all of us in our guts, the people sitting around that table, as well as the people who are at all interested in the trial, who see it as a real thing, we all of us, and more people even than that, kind of gotten into our guts the feeling that the courts are somehow, ultimately, through some kind of work, some form of social justice is attainable in the courtroom. And we don't believe it intellectually in our guts. It's hard not to believe that. And that's a lesson that we learn over and over again in that courtroom. I mean, the judge may be, often may be a caricature, which good liberals will dismiss, as kind of not representative of the system. And everyone will be sure that somehow, either through individual juror's obstinacy, or through some higher court's independent standards, either a verdict against us would be overturned, or perhaps because of that individual juror's obstinacy, no decision against us will be able to be reached in that courtroom. That's possible, perhaps that's so. But I think that the very fact of our submittal to that process is one which I don't necessarily advocate for other people to take. We took that road, show up in court every day, because it was really, as what I was talking about earlier, about the burdens of publicly noticed actors, that they have certain kinds of responsibilities, which I don't think everybody has, and I don't think everybody should have. It's very difficult to figure out how to relate constantly to that court process, to that attempted judicial punishment kind of wreaked against us, and that tension, our intellectual and emotional responses and our political responses, and those things add a tension, add a dimension of madness that's not really fully apparent, I don't think, all the time. What do I look for at the end of the trial? Well, put us away. They're going to put us away. I just said, I think that it's possible that we might get a hung jury. More likely, because there's 7 of us and 14 charges altogether, it gives the jury an opportunity to negotiate among themselves. They'll finally walk in back into the jury room after having come out twice and said that they can't reach a decision, the judge constantly sending them back. So they'll sit down in the room, and either the good liberals who are for us or the people who are strongly against us will say, well, look, my God, they can't all be innocent, or they can't all be guilty, so who do you think is the most guilty? Who do you think is the most innocent? And they'll start to negotiate. Somebody will be found guilty on both counts. Somebody will be found innocent on, one, maybe both. People will be guilty of one, not guilty of another. Dave might be guilty of conspiracy, but not guilty of his specific inciting act. Rennie might be guilty of an inciting act, but not guilty of conspiracy. It's a negotiated agreement among the jurors. And then we'll go to jail. Go to jail for contempt, go to jail on this charge. I think people's responses will be a lot like people's responses were when Huey was convicted. That if it's clear, if the court had chosen to exercise its full power against Huey, people would have gone mad. People would have responded in an aggressive, revolutionary way. A confused 2 to 15. How do you respond to that? Does that mean he's going to get out right away? Of course it didn't. It didn't then, it doesn't now. But people have, even the most corrupt court, even the most brutally oppressive judicial system, retains kind of an aura of hope or possibility in it. And so people respond differentially to our case. I hope very strongly that some people will learn from our case that one does not voluntarily submit to plain judicial punishment. I hope some people take that lesson out of our trial. Others will say, all right, it's possible to present some kind of, even in the most restrictive court, it's possible to present some kind of coherent political statement, and sometimes that coherent political statement in a courtroom needs to be made. To those people, I had the caution that they have to be aware that because the people who are indicted in this case, the style of the indictment and the event itself that led to the indictment meant a context, a public media context of this trial, which a lot of trials don't have. I think most particularly of John Sinclair's trial, which a lot of people said then, and I suppose too many people say now, John Sinclair who? I don't know, I think probably most people will end up feeling bad for a while, which is wrong, but that's how they'll, and they'll feel that, well, we'll organize demonstrations and perhaps political pressure in terms of the threatened complete illegitimacy, perceived illegitimacy of the judicial system, will force the judges to free us on some technical thing that happened during the court. Not necessarily overthrowing the law or saying that we were innocent, but they'll find some way to get us out. That may happen. That might happen. It'd be nice if it did. I don't think people should go to prison. It'd be nice if we don't have to go.
Tom, you more certainly than any of the other defendants have been the producer and the coordinator of the defense. First, let me ask what went into your decision and as to whether to present a defense at all.
Well, at the end of the government's case, I think that we had a situation where probably a couple of the jurors felt that the government hadn't presented a case, and from a very narrow legalistic point of view, the government probably had not presented enough evidence of a conspiracy or of our having provoked the so-called disorder. And in a number of areas, like the charges about incendiary devices concerning Lee and John, they had produced almost nothing. And I think that any criminal lawyer in the country would have recommended that we rest, on the grounds that very often in these cases you give more evidence about yourself in making your defense than the government has when it makes its case. And politically, I think that by that time we had succeeded in showing that we were on trial for charges which were ridiculous on the face of it, and that was a mockery. It was a kind of political persecution. And so there were some arguments for quitting at that point. I think that the arguments for going ahead were much stronger, though. And I guess I think that we had a political responsibility to present a defense, to try to show a number of things. First of all, to show that what we feel is the truth about Chicago would be blocked in the courtroom by collaboration between the judge and the prosecutor, but at least we'd be able to raise questions in the courtroom about Chicago. And secondly, we had a responsibility, I think, to indicate the totally different nature of reality as we understand it, contrasted to what the defense put on. Theirs was a narrow, kind of evil description of revolution, and I thought that we had to put on a more full-blown, colorful, and rich presentation of it, that the people of the country would at least hear something about. I think also by putting on a defense, we were able to help build political support for the case. Only by bringing in defense witnesses, well-known ones as well as lesser-known ones, do you start to get people involved in the trial who then can go out and be speakers, return to their hometowns, return to their political circles, and talk about what they saw and experienced on the witness stand. So by putting on 100, 110 witnesses, we've picked up that many organizers and that many spokesmen around the country. The government has the 7 of us or the 8 of us acting kind of covertly and bringing our nails and Molotov cocktails into Chicago, when in fact the real story of Chicago was that it was the people versus the police. And so we've tried to evoke that through the defense and bring as many of the people in as we possibly could, and the press would cover that, but those all of the organs of communication of the movement would cover it, and the people themselves would then be involved in the trial, go out and speak. And I think that that's happened. I think that we've mobilized political support by putting on a defense. I think we've engaged people across the country much more deeply in what the trial is all about. And if the trial is about eliminating what happened in the 1960s, which I think is what Nixon and Mitchell would like to do, the defense, I think, has brought back the 1960s. It's been a kind of historical defense, not a defense at all, but a kind of journey backwards in time to our own political and cultural origins, and then the kind of clarification of those origins for everybody's benefit. I think that the people who read the transcripts and begin to find out what was said in the defense will find that it's one of the most illuminating things that they'll ever be able to read about what's happened in the last 10 years, and it's a good basis for judging what will happen in the future. The defense has been the people versus the police state. About 30 out of the 100 witnesses were people who were eyewitnesses to police brutality or were brutalized themselves. And we tried to establish, as I say, a pattern of police brutality directed against almost everyone who was in Chicago, from McCarthy workers to anti-war people to yippies to newsmen to ministers. Tried to put on 10 or 12 people who were involved in permit negotiations from all angles. The yippies attempted in early '68 and throughout the summer to get Lincoln Park for their Festival of Life. The mobilization attempted to get permits for sleeping in the parks and meeting in the parks at night, for holding public rallies and demonstrations, and for holding a march to the amphitheater on August 28th. We had some of the negotiators themselves, like Rennie Davis and Mark Simon from mobilization. Abbie testified, and Allen Ginsberg testified to some extent about yippie permit negotiations. And we tried to introduce the fact that the representatives of the Department of Justice, Community Relations Service, were also involved in the negotiations and felt that permits should be given, that Rennie and the yippies and other groups were reasonable, that it was possible to have effective negotiations with us, whereas in the opinion of the Justice Department, Mayor Daley was the rigid and unyielding figure. That
takes us into the question of what did happen in Chicago, which we also tried to at least shed some light on in the defense, because it becomes very clear if you establish a deliberate pattern of pervasive police brutality, first of all, and secondly, you find that there's a wholly unreasonable posture on the part of the city towards permit negotiations, and you establish that there was a division in the United States government from the top levels downward about how to treat demonstrators and how to treat the question of permits, then you begin to reopen the very deep question and problem of what was happening in the country and what was happening in the government that caused Chicago. Chicago seemed to be a case, from our point of view, of the emergence of a police state, the suspension of normal constitutional rights, and the use of all kinds of techniques of intimidation to reduce the numbers of people coming to demonstrate here. And then the pursuit of even the few who came, pursuit on the part of police against those few who came, forcing a confrontation all over the city. Now that's evident from the testimony, and what that indicates to me, or I think indicates to most of us, is that the time of the convention was a time in which the government was changing its tactics, at least towards young white people, from tactics of tolerance and an attitude of trying to get along with demonstrations, represented by Ramsey Clark, towards an attitude of legalized repression and police terror, represented by Lyndon Johnson and Mayor Daley. Now we can't establish why they did this, but I think that we can establish from our testimony that there was a deliberate decision against the advice of the Attorney General to use tactics of terror and intimidation. Now, I'm talking particularly about Ramsey Clark's testimony that he was not allowed to give, in which he said that he saw no evidence of the need for prepositioning of federal troops, that could only create an atmosphere of questioning on the part of people about what those troops were going to be used for. And I think that given the fact that the government, for its case, has now produced a list of witnesses almost exclusively drawn from the FBI, from Army and Navy intelligence, and from the Chicago Police Department, you'd have to say that 1968 saw the emergence into public view of a police state apparatus that was really aimed at trying to return the country to the rule of the 1950s.
Hasn't it been...
That would make sense, of course, since the 1960s began with the retirement of General Eisenhower and they ended with the inauguration of President Nixon. But I do think that all along, throughout the Cold War, we've had an internal police state with a kind of democratic covering, and that in a time of crisis like the 1960s, the covering tends to fall apart, the police state emerges, and that's what happened in Chicago, and that's what I think this trial demonstrates. Now, beyond that, the major thing that I think we tried to say in our defense had to do with this question of our intent. It's our intent, our state of mind, our consciousness that we've been tried for, and most of the witnesses who testified about that intent in coming to Chicago and demonstrated in court the kind of identity that we want to project. Well, we have been trying to use all options available to us. I should have said that, I think, earlier. We've been trying to deny the charges that are specifically lodged against us. That is, that we had the intention of inciting a riot. We deny that. We say that there was a deliberate plan of repression rather than our having incited a riot. It was a planned police brutality and a planned official attitude towards demonstrators that occurred. And we think that that can be presented honestly to a jury. I think a jury can understand that, and we've attempted to do that, but we've also attempted to show the jury and show everybody that we feel we're not being tried for Chicago in the narrow sense that the government presents it. We're being tried, as Ramsey Clark says, as a signal for the beginning of political repression. They're not after us for Chicago, but they're after us because of all that we represent. And the decision was made by Attorney General Mitchell that this was kind of an example that he was going to use to scare people all over the country and to get rid of some people, or at least tie some people up for some time. So we've tried to present a specific rebuttal to what we're charged with, and also generally point out what I think is now evident to the jury, that it's not really what we're being tried for. What we're really being tried for is everything that we did and millions of other people did in the 1960s. I think that you'll never convince the ultra-respectable people of how to put on a political trial, however. I mean, they would argue that we should have put on no defense, and then if we're going to put on a defense, they would argue to put on nothing but little old ladies and innocent bystanders, and that would be, I think, a betrayal of our own politics, to go to that extreme of trying to play the legal game. On the other hand, we're not into taking credit for what we didn't do, and we're not into a kind of adventurous and total disruption of the courtroom at all. We're trying to play kind of a balancing strategy out to the finish. The same people, the ultra-respectable people, I think also have a different view of the system than we do. They have a faith in the system. For instance, they feel that the law will be held to be unconstitutional, and they seem to have more faith in the system than they do in the jury, and certainly more faith in the system than they do in the people, more faith in the upper courts than they have in the masses of people. A political strategy for the trial, though, that we would have, rests on having no faith in the system, rests on the idea that if we're to even get appeal bond, or get the case reversed at the upper levels, it'll require a political mobilization of a very powerful kind, because otherwise the stacking of the Supreme Court and the policy of repression will keep us in jail for years. And we have a faith in the jury and a faith in the people, while having almost no faith in the system. Faith in the jury means something like what it meant to have faith in the American people at the beginning of the anti-war movement. That is, here are these 12 jurors and 2 alternates drawn out of so-called Middle America, with little or nothing in common with us as far as we know, chosen from voter lists, with a class background that would indicate that they should be conservative, they should be protective of the social order, and they're made jurors in a kind of a 1984 situation. They're sequestered, they're taken here and there by federal marshals. They are told endless lies by the government about us. We're not allowed to speak to them. We're not allowed to have any direct communication with them except through the terrible filtering process of the courtroom. And it's hard to believe, if you're as alienated from the system as we are, that such people could be brought around. And it's an open question whether people of this kind can be brought around. There has been an awakening on the Vietnam War, however, not a sufficient awakening, but a certain awakening. And it's conceivable to me that in a prolonged political struggle inside the courtroom, we could help to awaken the consciousness and the conscience of some of those jurors, and we could create, through our being there day after day in a prolonged, extended political struggle, we could create solidarity between some of them and some of us. Whereas I think the ultra-respectables in the courtroom and in the press take one look at the jury and write it off because the jury looks like a bunch of Agnew people or Wallace people who are to be feared. Now, by saying that, I am hardly saying that I believe in the jury trial system. I'm saying that I have at least a small confidence that if you do it in a prolonged way, you might be able to find, even in a rigged system like the jury system, some people who will come onto your side. Just as in a rigged political system, some people have awakened to what's going on in Vietnam. But I think beyond that, there's the masses of people.
Be
and this
specific.
well, let me just say just on this. The masses of people are the ultimate jury.
Bill, what do you predict will be the outcome of the trial in terms of the verdict from the jury? What do you expect the charges to the judge, from the judge to the jury will be? And in general, what's your opinion as to the outcome?
Well, I really don't care so much what the outcome is in one sense, because I think the defendants have won the case already. I think as far as the country is concerned, the verdict, most thinking people, is that the defendants have exposed what both the court system is and a system of government that thrives on repression and oppression. The judge's charges will be very harsh ones. When I say harsh, I mean those which are oriented toward a conviction, and I think that they will discourage the defendants no end when they hear them in court in the way he reads anything which he intends to hurt people, with a certain histrionic emphasis which we complained of when he read the indictment to the jury. I think that there is a strong possibility of a hung jury. We have a lot of hard stuff in the record which a lot of jurors will have a tough time swallowing, but I think the defense has been honest. We've presented every shade of opinion, from revolutionaries to pacifists, from black militants to essentially Uncle Toms. We've given a whole gamut of experience and range of life and lifestyle. And I think that in the light of this, there is a possibility, a strong one, that some jurors will find that we've been honest and candid, we've exposed the good and the bad, but there has been no conspiracy to incite riot proved.
So you think, in other words, that this case is in many ways like the convention of last year, where the demonstrators in the streets won the hearts of the people, so to speak, and you think that this might very well be the case after when this trial is over, regardless of whether the verdict is one of guilty or not guilty, nonetheless the truth has been told. Do you think it's been told as effectively as it could have been told in the courtroom?
Well, I think it's been told as effectively as it could have been. I think that other planners in planning such a defense could have had other variations and so on, but I'm satisfied internally, in my own conscience, that the job done by the defendants has been an excellent one. I think they have won the situation. I think that your definition or your comparison to the convention is very good. Whatever happens in the courtroom, I think, is kind of irrelevant. What has happened is the defendants, I think, have won the hearts of the country, and I don't mean the great silent majority, but among thinking people and articulate people in the country by what they've done in the courtroom. And I think that that's where the real verdict lies, and I think that's where politically most of these defendants would rather have the verdict from, not from a jury selected in an antiquated and unfair system, but from a jury of their peers, those who really share the same sensations and the same vibrations that they do.
What kind of people do you think are on the jury, Bill?
Well, I've looked at the jury as you have for God knows how long now, and I think the jury is probably a cross-section of a certain portion of America. It's a cross-section of the middle class and a certain type of the middle class, what I would call the lower middle class in essence. It's probably a cross-section of the silent majority, with a few possible exceptions on the jury. And they're not real exceptions, but they are people who are willing to listen, and I think there are 2 or 3 of those on that jury. Otherwise, it's much less like the country at large. It's Nixon's jury, in essence, the same jury that passes on the war in Vietnam and finds it not oppressive enough to demand that it be discontinued immediately, but who have a vague feeling that America is the land of promises and the land of equality and justice, and who are, I guess, in a certain sense, what you call patriotic people. They're very dangerous people to a group of defendants who present lifestyles so absolutely different from their own.
Do you think that your hunch that there may be 1 or 2 people on that jury who might hang it are that they in fact are exceptions to that kind of description that you just gave to describing the jury? Do you think that perhaps there are a few people who've been confronted by some of the things that have gone on in that courtroom, and perhaps it might have been the first time that they may have been confronted by different lifestyles, or have been forced to look at them at least, and that might have some bearing on their decision?
I don't think, Mickey, they're exceptions. I think that there are a few people on there that have certain sensibilities which are a little more defined than their neighbors in the jury box, and that these people can be educated. And I think they have been educated throughout this trial. It's our hope only that the education continues through deliberation and that they stick to their guns if they are confronted with 8 or 9 or 10 adamant jurors who say we want to convict and we must convict. These are no good people who must be put away for the benefit of society. If they stick and they hold out, then we will have that hung jury. If not, they'll kind of relapse back into the general pot from which they sprang and go back into the silent majority, having, I think, shirked probably the finest responsibility of their life.
You've had a number of opportunities to represent some of the more notable so-called celebrities in the movement, from Martin Luther King to Rap Brown, and I don't mean that in any kind of polarized way at all. What kind of role have you seen yourself as a lawyer playing in this case, and has it been any different from the kind of role that you played in other cases that you've had occasion to participate in?
It's a very hard question to answer, Mickey, but I would say this. I've been representing this type of client for just 10 years. The 5th decade of my life has been spent in this type of work. And in the beginning, I started out with, I think, a very racist, very chauvinistic view of myself, that I would make the decisions, the lawyer was the king, and the lawyer would just have clients because you need clients to be a lawyer, but you don't need them for any other purpose except to have names on a complaint or names in an indictment to give you a forum for yourself. I finally come around, and it's hard for me because I have a very strong ego. I finally come around to where I now see myself as someone who is only employed to help other people find a vehicle for their own convictions and their own political theories and desires. And I think that's where I am in this case. In no other case, even with Dr. King, who did not have strong feelings about what went on in the courtroom and who would not dictate what you were to do whatsoever, I think that I now am in a position where I have relegated the importance of my role to where I think it properly belongs, to be a functionary and servant of the people who are the thought-provokers, who are the leaders, who are the people who have the respect of hundreds of thousands and millions of people in their particular fields, like a Dellinger, like a Bobby Seale, and so on. And I think that with these people, I now have reached what I think is a true role for myself, and that is serving them and expounding for them, or working out whatever means I have to do so, a vehicle or a forum for the expressions of their own political views.
A couple of times during the course of the trial, Bill, in line with your response to the last question, you've been called some pretty nasty things by the prosecution. I think at one point during the moratorium commemorances, you were called a mouthpiece. Did you take that as a compliment, or did that kind of get under your skin a little bit?
I didn't take it as a compliment. I took it as a very derogatory remark, because the word mouthpiece used to mean a lawyer for a criminal syndicate. He was called the mob's mouthpiece. And it had a very derogatory aspect to it in that he was supposed to be mouthing the vocal spokesman for an unsavory group who used a conventional means of expression for their own nefarious purposes. On the other hand, I take the word mouthpiece as maybe Mr. Foran meant it, to have another meaning. And in that, don't think it's so derogatory, because maybe I am a spokesman in some ways of the views of the clients I represent. And maybe that's a proper function for a lawyer to be, within the limits of what he can do in a courtroom, to provide the forum that I mentioned before of expounding certain social and political and economic views of his client. If that was the intent of Mr. Foran, then I accept it kindly and gladly. I think he probably meant the other thing, that I was just a parrot for anything Tom Hayden or Jerry Rubin said. I think that the defendants know that isn't so, but the lawyers have been very, very receptive to the thoughts of the clients, and it is the clients who are running the case, not the lawyers. I think the old canon of ethics that said the lawyers must really run the case and be responsible for everything in the courtroom doesn't fit a political trial. The clients must have the responsibility and the energy and the authority to really run their own case. After all, it's their necks that are on the chopping block. I think they have a right to try to save them, if they can, by the methods they want to use, or even if they don't want to save them, if they're going to have their heads chopped off, to go down the way they want to go down.
When you indicated that you worked very closely with the defendants, this wasn't just sort of a structured kind of thing wherein people say that they work very closely. You actually did, they actually do in fact run their case, don't they?
Yeah, there's no question about that. It's really quite a working democracy, because as you know, we voted on many things as a voting unit of 9 or 10 or 11 people, and the votes were whether to accept the jury, as it was, if you recall, way back in September. And we have, with rare exceptions, there have been breakdowns in this, but with rare exceptions, we have voted, we have had a certain type of method of reaching a decision on almost every important crisis in the trial. And sometimes that fails, sometimes we don't communicate, sometimes there are frayed nerves, but in general, I think, from my experience, it's been a very harmonious relationship.
My name is James Cunin. I came today to testify at the trial. This is January 14th, and the reason I was called is because Jerry Rubin, in reading my book, The Strawberry Statement, came across an account that I wrote of the speech he gave at an anti-Humper rally in New York in July of 1968, and the prosecution calls that speech one of the overt acts by which they have reason to prosecute for conspiracy. And specifically, they say that he called in that speech for the disruption of the Democratic Convention. And I know that he didn't say that, so that's what I came here to say. The basic distortion that the prosecution worked with regard to my testimony was that they quoted extensively from what a fellow from Columbia, David Slavin, had said in a speech following Rubin, and implied that this speech could be considered representative of what Rubin had said or might say or what he thought, when in fact they were directly counterposed. Rubin had spoken, and this is what I said, out for everyone going to Chicago for a festival of life. And then Slavin got up and said, no, this is hippie type stuff, and what we need is real, no games, but real radical organizing. And he said, it is going to be underground and it's going to be armed. And that became a bone of contention in the court because the DA paraphrased that as saying the revolution is going to be underground and armed. And I kept yelling at him that he didn't say the revolution, he said it, and that it was really funny that I get sucked into that kind of thing, because of course I really agree that he was talking about the revolution, but that's the way the trial or any trial works, I guess, is you end up arguing about what it means and whether or not you're justified to say something. But anyway, the main flagrant violation of
the truth of what I was trying to say was that the DA tried to turn it around and identify a militant violent speech with the hippie type have a good time speech that Rubin had given. The DA was able to quote extensively from what Slavin had said, was able to question me about it, was able to imply that it was identical with what Rubin thinks. And he was even able to read from my personal notebook on a page that was not entered into evidence. And all the defense objections about that were overruled. Then in second cross, or whatever they call it, when Kunstler, the defense lawyer, got up to question me about what I had said to the DA, he tried to ask me whether or not, in fact, Slavin's speech was a rebuttal to, and rather than identical with, Rubin's speech. And Hoffman sustained objections even before they were elaborated. You know, the DA just starts to rise, and Hoffman says, sustained, you know, and said, you can't lead the witness. And I don't know what's leading the witness about that, particularly in contrast with the way the DA questioned me, because he kept on saying things like, and then Rubin called for the violent disruption of the convention, didn't he, you know, and then didn't Rubin say this and that, you know, and things which he, of course, hadn't said. So that really, I guess, encapsulated a lot of things that are wrong with the trial right there, which was that the Hoffman was biased and the DA was distorting and Kunstler was put down and so on and so forth. It was hardly fair even by the rules of the state. I mean, they don't even play their own game right. I guess all in all, my most overwhelming impression of the trial is that it's an enormous game, and that what did or did not actually take place prior to and during the convention at Chicago, it really doesn't make any difference to anybody. It's just a question of playing these legal games and seeing what you can get allowed in and what you can allude to without saying and things like that. It certainly doesn't seem to have very much to do with the jury, because it was my impression that the jury was asleep throughout not only my solid hour of testimony, but also the three people I saw after me. It wasn't only one of them out there was literally asleep, but the others didn't seem particularly interested. And I think if you had asked them, you know, what's going on right now, they probably would have had to say, I really don't know, for which I can't blame them after 4 months. I think the jury's going to vote the way they would have voted on the first day before any testimony, however they happen to feel about the thing. After me, I did stay around and watch the trial go on, and three witnesses after me really betrayed the prosecution's objection bag. They just said the DA objected to every single question that Kunstler asked, and literally three witnesses did not get a chance to say anything whatever, which I think was probably pretty effective for our side, because the jurors must have wondered what the state was afraid of. You know, why aren't they letting these people talk, particularly one woman who was very sweet and very nice and nurse, you know, and it's great that they shut her up, didn't get a chance to say one word, literally. So, you know, all in all, I was glad to have a chance to participate in the trial of the century, and after Sacco and Vanzetti, I guess, the next to the trial of the century. And, you know, I was glad I could come, and as far as any prognostication about how it's going to come out, I think that it isn't going to come out, because Hoffman so flagrantly violated judicial procedure so many times that even I, not a lawyer, could, you know, clearly perceive that he was doing it. I'm sure that whatever happens is just going to be thrown out. We're going to be going through the circus all over again.
And I am Jane Kennedy from the Medical Committee for Human Rights, and I was asked to testify because during Convention Week I was chairman of the Chicago chapter of the Medical Committee for Human Rights, and this year I am national vice chairman of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. I had information to offer that had to do with our attempts to reach city officials and other agencies around the question of health planning and emergency health planning during the Convention Week. That probably is the essence of what I had to say, but I wasn't allowed to say anything. And I suppose they didn't want me to say anything, because the things I had to say did mean that the city had absolutely no plan to do any kind of extra health planning or emergency health planning during the convention. Nothing, absolutely nothing was I allowed to say.
How did the courtroom look from the witness stand? What were your general impressions?
Well, I looked at the jury, and they seemed to be either exhausted or bored or past the point they could receive messages from people. I think that's the way I felt about them. They had been bombarded with information and people, and it was almost like they couldn't take any more in, and so they were just bodies sitting there. I was happy to see the liveliness of the defendant's at the defendant's table. I almost knew as soon as Mr. Weinglass finished asking a question that Mr. Foran would be on his feet objecting to the question, and the judge would. It was almost automatic procedure. As soon as Mr. Foran objected, the judge consistently sustained his objection. It was like two horses working together, sort of, you know. It was an incredible thing. I couldn't understand why they wouldn't let me answer some questions, like Mr. Weinglass said. This was a meeting that we had for medical volunteers the Saturday before the convention. What were you doing at the Reynolds Club? And they wouldn't let me say what I was doing at the Reynolds Club. You know, why not? I was asked, what is the Medical Committee for Human Rights? I was not allowed to say what this organization is. You know, what are they afraid of? What were they afraid of that I wasn't allowed to testify? Of course, what I was trying to do was find a way to say something. And of course, I was speaking over the objection of Mr. Foran, trying to get some information in. And we did have a little game there. You know, the judge was a little flirtatious with me, which I suppose is all right. But then when I finally again talked over the objection, he said that he gave up on me. He gave up on the witness, and he swiveled his chair such that he turned his back to me.
Arlo Guthrie, defense witness at the Pharisee trial.
In the conferences you had with Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman, you brought out in testimony that you would not participate unless permits were granted, and you would discourage others from participating.
Yeah, well, I did that. I did that on stage at Newport, and that was like 20,000 people.
What happened in court, Arlo?
Well, I don't really know, you know, like, because it was, I mean, obviously the prosecutor or whatever he is wasn't really interested in what I had to say. He was opposed to everything that came up about the police being violent as a reason for going or not going. The judge, he's kind of funny. You know, Julian. That's the only, I can't really think about anything else. I mean, I told him, you know, what went down, what I told Jerry and Abbie and all that. It was kind of groovy, though, being there.
What was it that you did testify in response to Bill Kunstler's question?
Oh, I said really was that in all the meetings that I had had with Abbie and Jerry, that the main concern of mine was that it was going to really be a festival of life, and that it was not going to be just a lot of guys getting their head beat in and calling it a festival of life. I didn't mind people getting their heads beat in as long as they knew what was going to happen. What I was opposed to was having it called a festival of life when we knew pretty much, you know, at least when I knew that somebody was going to get beat up because the permits weren't issued.
Patrolman Renault Robinson, who is the president of the Afro-American Patrolmen's League, who in one of the more dramatic appearances of the trial appeared today in the uniform of a Chicago policeman to testify about a number of matters. Officer Robinson, what did you want to testify about, and what did you testify about?
Well, I wanted to just explain the training that the Chicago Police Department is going through. The fact that our training for riot control consists of training with the baton, the use of the shotgun, and mass arrests, and that we have no alternate methods of training, no alternate methods of crowd control, no other way to deal with social protesters other than with the baton, with the show of force, and with mass arrest. All of our training, well, we have 4 weeks a year that we have to go to school, and it's a rotating basis, and the entire department has to go. And during that training, it's 95% of the training is all riot control, marching, riot formations. They teach us how to use gas. Of course, we don't have any actual demonstration of how the gas works except to be told, so we don't really know how dangerous it is until we have to use it ourselves in, an actual situation. But they demonstrate the different types of gases available to the police department, the fact that, how to put on a gas mask, what happens if you get gassed yourself, when to use gas and what types to use depending upon the different situations, techniques such as throw a smoke bomb first and then throw the gas, because the smoke will hold the gas in over the crowd, and different things of that nature, the psychological effect of a shotgun, and and nothing else, no other ways, no alternate methods.
Were you allowed to get most of what you had to say before the jury?
No, they let me say something, bits and pieces about the training. A couple other things that they asked me about were the victory party that the district had to celebrate their victory. Some men from our district, a contingent of men from our district, made Newsweek because of some of the activities. And there were counter charges that they were extremely brutal, and there was a big story about it in the national magazine with their pictures. And so, they felt like heroes, called themselves the Thunder and Three, put signs and things on the buses that they came downtown in. And, the fact that black officers seemed to sort of shy away from this whole thing, because there were two attitudes, one of picnic by them and, one of dismay from us. So he didn't let me get that in. They didn't let us get in the fact that at the party they were eating and drinking, and a group of officers, while one of our officers who led one of the raids, they said, "Sieg Heil," and stood up and raised their hands, and everybody started laughing, and, this guy stiffened up and got real proper, and, he's a militaristic type guy anyway. Keeps his shoes shined, always, purely military. And, it was amazing to me to watch this at the party,
Did you find the courtroom today much like the rest of your experience in Chicago, and particularly in the context of some of the retaliation you've suffered for your activities with the Afro-American Patrolmen's League?
Well, to try and break that question up, first, the courtroom procedures just threw me. I've been to court 1,000 times on criminal matters that have sent people to the penitentiary. And, I've never seen a judge and a prosecutor work together so well. As they did. I mean, it seems that the prosecutor was telling the judge how to conduct the trial. I mean, the judge would wait to find out what he thought about everything. Whatever he wanted, he got. I don't think anything he asked for, he didn't get, which is, unbelievable.
On the second part of that question, wasn't dangerous for you even to testify in a case like this?
Well, no more dangerous than the other activities. If you holler about death with the shotgun and policemen killing people under hazy circumstances, improper circumstances, and, to participate in this is it's all the same ball of wax. You say injustice is wrong wherever it occurs, and I think that policeman is not supposed to be an upholder of a system. He's just supposed to be a functionary in it. If he believes he sees an offense, he does one thing. He's just supposed to arrest. Nothing else, no judgment. But when you see things occurring, when you know that things are occurring and the system is rotten, the system that we operate under, law enforcement, whole concept, it just does not work to blacks' advantage or people who have a different political view than the system that the police work for. we uphold the Democratic Party and everything they stand for. I mean, we can wear their campaign buttons and they give us their campaign literature, but we can't do anything about anything else. Any opposing views are met with retaliation in one form or another, through the rule violations or increased supervision, bad assignments, anything they can do. Has that happened to you? Oh, yes. I'm suffering from over 107 days of suspension. But, you know, you just have to expect that. If they didn't give me any suspension, I wouldn't be doing anything. I know how popular I am because my name is all over the bathroom walls. But you're going to keep on keeping on. I got to. There's no return. You know, you just can't turn around.
I'm Lee Edmondson, and I testified today at the conspiracy trial, primarily regarding John Freund's and Rennie Davis. My testimony consisted of a narration of what happened to me and what I saw and did on Monday, August 26, 1968, during the convention. I was in Lincoln Park at approximately 2 o'clock, and it was then that Tom Hayden was arrested. A march was formed. I carried a speaker system for the marshals and the leaders of the demonstration on my head. And when I wasn't doing that, I was working as a marshal, keeping people on the streets. The march went from Lincoln Park to the Central Police Station, where Rennie and John discussed with some other people whether or not it should disband there or go on to the Hilton. It was decided that it would go on to the Hilton. We started the march to the Hilton. As we got to the Hilton, a lot of people started breaking away from the group and heading for a grassy knoll in Grant Park, on which was the equestrian statue of General Jonathan A. Logan.
Lee, you testified today about the role of Rennie Davis and John Freund in keeping that march peaceful. What about the role of the police? What happened to you when you were stranded on that Logan statue and tried to climb down as they ordered?
I started to go down the tail. The officer was in full view of me. As I got about a third of the way down, he reached for his nightstick and was in the process of pulling it out, and then ducked under the statue, to which I promptly responded by heading right back up the statue, primarily for the reason that I had heard the sound that Billy Club makes on human flesh in Lincoln Park the previous day, and I just didn't want it happening to me. Next thing I realized, there was a policeman who had climbed part of the way up the statue. He had grabbed my left leg and was trying to pull me off, which would have been a fall of about 30 feet. I jerked away from him, went into a crouched position against the back of General Logan. He continued to climb after me. I spun around, facing the saber side, the side that General Logan's saber is affixed, and grabbed hold to keep from being pushed off. Well, I was pushed off, and as I grabbed the saber, my arm got wedged in the hilt. At that time, when I was dangling there, 2 policemen on the ground jumped up and grabbed my legs and started pulling. I screamed at them that my arm was wedged, that they were breaking my arm, and if they would let me go and let me get my arm free, I'd come down. They continued to pull. The officer that initially grabbed my leg climbed the rest of the way up and was giving me very short, choppy blows with his fist in the back of the head. And this continued for, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. Seemed like much longer. So then I heard someone say, "Let me up there, I'll get that son of a bitch." And then there was a police officer just 6 inches away from my face. He climbed up, he was facing me, and he was hitting me in my groin and lower abdomen. He hit me 3 times. I was screaming at him that my arm was wedged, that they were breaking it, that if they would let go of it, that I'd come down, just let go of my goddamn feet so I could get my arm down. His facial expression was that he understood what I was saying, and he didn't do anything. They kept pulling, I kept screaming, they kept pulling, and finally a third officer joined in, pulling the legs, and the last thing I remember was the sound of my arm breaking. The next thing I was cognizant of was being dragged away. My arms were handcuffed behind my back. I was being dragged away by two policemen to a prowl car. From the park to Central Police Station, where I was detained for about an hour and a half. I was charged with aggravated battery, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Around 8 o'clock that night, I was assigned a ward 33. They took me up to the ward. They told me that since I was 18, they couldn't treat me, and that my mother would have to wire permission from Birmingham. As she did, permission got in around midnight, and at midnight I got my first pain shot. I spent it. The next day they tried to set the arm. It wouldn't set. About an inch of the bone had been powdered when the arm broke. So they kept me doped up on pain medicine all Tuesday. And then Wednesday morning I went to surgery, and they put in about 4 or 5 inch stainless steel plate with 6 screws holding my right radius together. I still have it in my arm, yeah. My case was not adjudicated until 14 months afterwards, in October of 1969. The prosecution made a deal that if I would plead guilty to resisting arrest, that they would drop the aggravated battery indictment, which carried 6 months to 5 years, I believe. I made the deal. I was fined $500, and that was it. In regard to what I couldn't answer, what the prosecution wouldn't let me answer, they wouldn't let me explain what the chant, "Hell no, we won't go," meant. The prosecution tried to make it out as it meant that the demonstrators were not going to move from the Central Police Station during the Monday demonstration. And I tried to explain this, and the prosecution would not let me explain. Prosecution also tried to suggest that I was lying about not hearing anybody say anything to me over a bullhorn while I was on the statue, which didn't shake me because I didn't, but they tried to make it out that I did. There was a big row over the "Hell no, we won't go" thing between Kunstler, no, not Kunstler, Lenny Weinglass, one of the lawyers, and Judge Hoffman, who is a remarkable dude. He does look like Mr. Magoo. He really does. He's incredible. He was. I noticed quite a few times throughout the while I was on the stand that he was playing with himself behind the bench, and I think Abbie was pretty much correct with what he told me this morning. That I think it was Abbie said that this is Judge Hoffman's kingdom, and he's the king, and he's not going to let anybody, show him up, and that's exactly what it is. And the one thing I noticed was that, like, Judge Hoffman would cue Foran when he wanted an objection that he didn't think Foran was going to make, and he would sustain. All Foran would have to do was stand up, and Hoffman would say sustained. The jury, as far as the jury is concerned, the jury looks like they want to go home, and they're really not interested. They're bored. The prosecution's bored because the prosecution knows damn good and well that every objection it makes, it's going to be sustained, and that's what happened today. I'd say the defense made. I'd say the prosecution made at least 75 objections, and every one of them were sustained. None of the defense objections, which were very few, but none of them were sustained.
To go back before all this happened, what did you come to Chicago to do in the summer of '68?
I was working for McCarthy in Alabama, and I was supposed to come up to Chicago to work on the National Democratic Party of Alabama challenge before the Democratic Convention. was supposed to go to work Monday night, but didn't make it.